Hello? Can you?
Buenos días.
Hello, if you could please take a seat. We are about to start. Thank you very much. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first European Science Diplomacy Conference. My name is Leire Leguina. I'm from the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies today. So I'm very glad to be with all of you here in Madrid. Thank you for coming. And also, thank you to the participants that are joining us remotely. So for them, just a quick reminder, there is a Spanish and English translation available for the live stream. And also for the ones that are here, for our audience, if you need translation, you have some translation devices right outside. So, bienvenidos a la primera conferencia.
Welcome to the first European Conference of Science Diplomacy, organized by the European Commission, the Ministry of Science and Innovation and Universities, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union cooperation in the framework of the Spanish presidency of the Council of the European Union. We are going to proceed to the opening session. I will give the floor to the director of the Ramón Areces Foundation, Don Ramón Pérez Hernández. Thank you, Leire. Secretary of State, Director of the SID, distinguished members and friends of the European Commission, dear friends from the Ministry of Science, EFIT, and dear colleagues of my dear friends. I would like, first of all, to welcome you on behalf of the patronage of the Ramón Areces Foundation and hope your best success during this day. The Ramón Areces Foundation feels particularly honored and grateful for having been trusted to hold this very important conference, relevant chapter of the thematic of the European Council of the President of Spain, as we all subscribe to. Ramón Areces Foundation with a clear scientific vocation, pretends not only go into depth in basic scientific research, but also at the same time be a forum for knowledge and culture. That's why Ramón Areces Foundation, this time, in view of such an initiative of science diplomacy, will contribute to expand the progress and achievements that take place in the world. We feel especially honored because in this way we recognize the contribution of the private sector, more specifically the sector of the foundations, to this strategic innovation that is this scientific cooperation from the very beginning. We have tried to contribute actively to elaborate the Spanish strategy in tight collaboration with the Spanish administration, with the Ministry of Science and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Some very brief ideas. At a first moment, and in a structural manner, science diplomacy is channeling somehow the effort, interest, and programs of cooperation among the different governments, both at the bilateral level and at the multilateral level. Being a Spanish ambassador in CERN, I was able to verify the power and the potential that was absolutely indispensable in different operations and investments that are so complex and costly. The CERN is a great example of it. This aspect of the diplomacy has acquired an accelerated speed that can only be consolidated and developed in the future, and it's enriching the relationships between the different countries. Without removing any importance from this process that depends on the whole universe and material resources in the world, we have to also bear in mind to integrate in our analysis the growing contribution and the creative dynamism of the incorporation of new actors in science diplomacy. I'm referring, for instance, to the growing role of the scientists, both in their countries of origin and in their countries of destination, that with their initiatives and activities do contribute to enrich the scientific network and entrepreneurial network. The scientists, the foundations, the universities, the research institutes, and the startups are giving new integration spaces to science diplomacy that not only can ignore, but it has to include them in their work. Many companies and many scientific institutions concerning research are channeling in a dynamic way the synergies and initiatives that arise in the development of science. I would like to congratulate those who have drafted the program of this conference for the rigor that they have, and also in order to have been so accurate in insisting on the aspects of science diplomacy in very sensitive regions and promising regions, as is the Mediterranean and Latin America. Both regions are especially sensitive for our country, and certainly do give rise to important attention from the civil society in Spain and the foundational sector. Ramon Areces Foundation contributes and will contribute in the future, as far as it is possible for it, but with the whole interest, to the development of the programs of science diplomacy that this conference is going to go into depth in. And finally, repeating my gratitude and wishing you the greatest success in developing your work and your stay in the Ramon Areces Foundation. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. A continuación, veremos un vídeo de bienvenida de la Comisaria Europea de Innovación, Investigación, Cultura, Educación y Juventud, Iliana Ivanova. Por favor.
We will see a video, Liliana Ivanova.
It's a pleasure to open the first European Science Diplomacy Conference, even if I cannot be with you in person. I warmly thank the Spanish presidency for prioritizing science diplomacy. I would like to highlight the presidency's crucial role in reaching the agreement on the legislative package extending the Partnership for Research and Innovation in the Mediterranean area, PRIMA, for the years 25-27. During this challenging period for the Mediterranean area, PRIMA serves as a model of science diplomacy in action. Thank you for recognizing its importance and for organizing this conference. Science diplomacy has been a cornerstone of the European project since its inception. Let me mention CERN, established in 1954, not only to explore fundamental scientific questions, but also to restore relations between countries after a terrible war. Or the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Vienna, founded during the Cold War by the US and the Soviet Union, with the two Germanys as founding members, and now includes diverse countries such as the US, China, Israel and Iran, Russia and Ukraine. This list would not be complete without SESAMI, the synchrotron light for experimental science and applications in the Middle East, which is a joint undertaking of many countries with strained relations. The EU played a key role in its establishment. And finally, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor ITER, under construction in Karadash, is a collaborative effort by the US, the EU, Japan, Korea, India, China and Russia, defying political and technical odds. These are well-known success stories of European science diplomacy. But times are changing. Today's world presents new challenges characterized by increasing polarization and the misuse of military force, as seen in the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and the spread of misinformation undermining societal trust and democratic values. At the same time, we are in an era marked by rapid scientific advancements, such as the expedited development of vaccines and breakthroughs in AI and quantum computing, demonstrating the positive impact of research and innovation on global issues. In this rapidly evolving landscape, the role of science diplomacy is more important than ever. We must champion openness and use research and innovation for the greater good while being mindful of its potential misuse for economic, geopolitical, or military gains. This concern led to the adoption of the European Economic Security Strategy earlier this year. This means that science diplomacy now involves tough choices, including imposing restrictive measures as seen with Russia, combating foreign interference, defending technological sovereignty, and protecting our interests. It represents a dual approach of soft and hard power requiring strategic application to align with European values and interests. This is one of the key messages of our global approach to research and innovation, and this is why we continue working towards an ambitious European framework for science diplomacy together with the member states. To achieve this, scientists and diplomats must collaborate closely, stepping out of their comfort zones. Today's conference in Madrid marks a significant step in this direction. I wish you all fruitful and thought-provoking discussions.
Thank you. Now, please welcome the Director General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission, Marc Lemaitre. Please, thank you.
Dear State Secretary, dear Director General of the Fundación Ramón Areces, dear Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, yes, I was looking for you, dear ambassadors, dear friends of European science diplomacy. It is a great pleasure for me to be able to address this first European Science Diplomacy Conference. First, let me thank the Spanish presidency for organizing this event with my colleagues at the European Commission. In particular, I would like to thank the Fundación Ramón Areces for hosting us in its truly magnificent facilities, and the organizing committee led by Ana Elorza Moreno and Gianmarco Müller, who have invested a lot of effort to make this event happen. It is gratifying and extremely motivating to see so many stakeholders from the science and diplomacy communities present at this conference, either physically in the room or connected online. This demonstrates how strongly the term science diplomacy resonates today, 13 years after it was first coined by the Royal Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. When we first spoke about science diplomacy in 2012, we defined it as follows: use international cooperation and research and innovation as an instrument of soft power and a mechanism for improving relations with key countries and regions. Good international relations may in turn facilitate effective cooperation in research and innovation. Later on, in 2016, we struck a more operational note, speaking about international research and innovation cooperation leading to common standards, scientific exchange and mobility, the sharing of resources and facilities, and scientific advice to diplomats and diplomat scientists should help underpin good governance and policy making and build mutual understanding and trust. While I still subscribe to these two statements, we also need to acknowledge a new, sobering geopolitical reality around us that requires more coordinated European efforts. Times are changing, as Commissioner Ivanova just stressed. In 2017, the study Tools for an EU Science Diplomacy by the Belgian expert Luc van Langenhove, who I think is with us today, pointed out that science diplomacy efforts in Europe remain largely uncoordinated. The study called for a proper EU science diplomacy strategy and related action plan to underpin the common foreign and security policy. To move towards evidence-informed policy decisions, the European Commission funded 3 dedicated research projects under the Horizon 2020 program, called first, using science for and in diplomacy for addressing global challenges. Second, inventing a shared science diplomacy for Europe. And third, European leadership in cultural, science, and innovation diplomacy. No doubt, many of you participated in these projects. Besides their practical outcomes, the most important legacy of these projects is to have contributed to building the community of scholars and practitioners in European science diplomacy, which we can see in this room today. The projects led to the Madrid Declaration on Science Diplomacy, signed almost to the day 5 years ago, and the establishment of the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance. Ana Elorza Moreno will tell you more about this journey in a moment. When the European Commission presented the new strategy for international cooperation in science and technology, called the Global Approach to Research and Innovation in May 2021, it was already obvious that the paradigm of openness was shifting. The communication reaffirmed the EU's openness to cooperation with partners worldwide, but it also stressed that this needs to happen based on shared values and principles. The global approach stressed the need for reciprocity and a level playing field to build trust with international partners. In this, the global approach reflected a much more political take on science diplomacy, flagging that a stronger focus on science and technology in the EU's foreign and security policies in terms of science diplomacy would help the EU to project soft power and pursue our economic interests and values more effectively, meeting demand and interest from partner countries and playing to the EU's strengths as a research and innovation powerhouse. In its conclusions on the global approach, the Council highlighted the importance of integrating it into the Union's external action and called on the Commission and the European External Action Service to develop a European science diplomacy agenda. Bringing science and diplomacy together is, to say the least, not a straightforward task. The first step we took was to establish a little steering team under the umbrella of the European Research Area subgroup on the global approach, helping us connect to key stakeholders. All members of the Science Diplomacy Steering Team are here in the room, and I would like to thank all of them for their relentless efforts to get us to the point we are today. Over the past 12 months, the steering team has engaged with many interest groups and committees to develop a potential structure of what we now call the European Framework for Science Diplomacy. This structure is reflected in the 4 plenary sessions we will have tomorrow. First, how to use science diplomacy strategically to tackle geopolitical challenges in a fragmented, multipolar world. Second, how to make European diplomacy more strategic, effective, and resilient through scientific evidence and foresight. Third, how to strengthen science diplomacy in EU and member states' diplomatic missions and foster the EU's global science diplomacy outreach. And fourth, how to build capacity for European science diplomacy. These 4 pillars, plus a cross-cutting topic on the definition, principles, and EU added value of European science diplomacy, are also reflected in the informal science diplomacy working groups, which we have now established. Each of these working groups will be co-chaired by a scientist and a diplomat. The aim is to develop the elements of a future European framework for science diplomacy in a co-creation process involving the various stakeholders. When we published the call for expression of interest to participate in these working groups, we did definitely not imagine that in just 3.5 weeks, we would get almost 600 applications, demonstrating considerable interest in the topic. Following this overwhelming response, we published the results 10 days ago, and I congratulate those selected And to those who haven't been, let me emphasize that we will need your expertise. Indeed, the working groups will need ad hoc experts for specific topics and will consult the broader community on their ideas. We expect the working groups to deliver the results by the end of June 2024. I can't predict exactly where all of this will lead us. We have deliberately not set a specific end point, as we feel it is essential to let European science diplomacy mature further, step by step. In fact, the process will foster the mutual understanding of science and diplomacy. All of this would not have been possible without the political support of our member states, and we will continue to count on it. For this reason, I would like to thank the Spanish presidency once more for having selected science diplomacy as one of the priorities of its presidency. Spain is a European pioneer in science diplomacy, and this conference is a further testimony to this. It was gratifying to see all member states unanimously calling for an ambitious European framework for science diplomacy at the meeting of research ministers presided by Minister Morant in Santander at the end of July. And it is equally rewarding to see this first European Science Diplomacy Conference being the last event, and if I may say so, a crowning moment of the Spanish EU presidency, together with the political agreement reached last week on PRIMA, our valuable partnership with southern Mediterranean neighbors. So we have come a long way, but the exciting journey, I would suggest, of European science diplomacy is just beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Lemaitre. To continue, please welcome the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, Mr. Nasser Kamel. The floor is yours.
Dear Director General Raymond Perez Hernandez Tora, Director of this magnificent institution, Secretary of State, of course, Mrs. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Sigoudoza, if I'm here, Director General Marc Lemaitre, Excellency, esteemed colleagues. It's truly a pleasure to be among you today at this European Science Diplomacy Conference, and I am very grateful to the Spanish presidency of the European Union for having organized this important conference, but also having included the Mediterranean as an important dimension. The Mediterranean region, an area in need of innovative approaches to diplomacy, including, of course, science diplomacy. Allow me at the outset to thank the Spanish presidency of the EU and the European Commission for raising visibility of the field of science diplomacy. For the first time at this level, Director Lemaitre mentioned the ministerial you just had a few months ago and how you're ending this presidency with this very important science diplomacy conference. And thanking you also for considering the two shores of the Mediterranean as one of the most appropriate scenario for advancing science diplomacy. This willingness has been demonstrated by facts on the ground, through notably the launch of the Mediterranean Initiative in Horizon Europe program and the continuous support of a key initiative such as PRIMA, of course, the Partnership for Research and Innovation in the Mediterranean area. A partnership that has incredibly advanced research throughout the region and that we all are happy regarding what they achieved. Later this afternoon, we will be, the Director General of PRIMA, my friend Octavio Quintara, will present you what this initiative has been able to achieve across, of course, our Mediterranean region. Ladies and gentlemen, science diplomacy is not a new instrument for neither the Mediterranean region nor, of course, the Union for the Mediterranean. It is in our DNA. It is embedded in everything we do. From climate action, blue economy, to women empowerment, research and innovation, the working methodology of the Union for the Mediterranean has been able to advance dialogue and cooperation by bridging data and expertise with diplomatic outreach. During the last 15 years, we at the UFM has been witnessing the benefits of having in its own structure diplomats from our member states working shoulder to shoulder with experts and drawing systematically on the wealth of knowledge coming from scholars and practitioners. Also, all UFM ministerial declarations include dedicated moments for voicing and listening to science and expertise through our stakeholder consultation. A clear example is our long-standing support for the group of Mediterranean experts on climate and environmental change, the MEDEC, an open and independent international scientific expert network acting as a mechanism for decision makers and the general public, filling an important niche, which is actually studying the impact of climate change on the Euro-Mediterranean region and giving impulse to climate cooperation between our decision-making, or makers, to be more accurate, in our region. For each of their report and finding, they prepare summaries for policymakers, and this is what we call the interface between science and policy, creating effective science policy interfaces that enable to create well-informed and solid policies. This de facto systematic use of science was endorsed last year thanks to the strong leadership of DG RTD, and especially Director Maria Cristina Russo, whom I salute today, as well as the Jordanian Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. In the first ever UFM Ministerial Conference on Research and Innovation, our ministers recognized the positive role of science diplomacy in enhancing regional cooperation in the Mediterranean while developing skills and promoting circulation of talents. So, ladies and gentlemen, sharing knowledge and technology has always been one of the main features of our region. Even in this tragic moment, where the space for peace and dialogue is shrinking, we cannot afford to lose the added value of working together on science, technology, and innovation. Now more than ever, it can be a key to unlock many doors, as in the darkest time, the wise language of science can show us the way for dialogue, cooperation, and inclusion in the Mediterranean. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. A continuación, tiene la palabra el
Now I give the floor to Dr. from ECID, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nanton Leys.
Muy buenas.
Good afternoon, dear Secretary of State of Science and Innovation and Universities, congratulations. Dear General Director of Research Innovation of the European Commission, dear Nasser, dear Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, dear General Secretary, and dear friends. It's an honor for me to take the floor this afternoon in this opening session of the first very important European Conference of Science Diplomacy on behalf of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation. And he's traveling today, and he asked me to convey his greetings, and he's apologized for not being able to be here. For our ministry, and particularly the Spanish Agency of International Cooperation for Development that I'm chairing, there is a great track of support of for integration of science in all its dimensions. We coordinate jointly with the Ministry of Science and Innovation and universities the foreign action that is deployed in a double aspect that has to be fed back. On the one side, this diplomacy at the for the science as ambassador of Spain and the values and the best that this country can offer in the world, and its scientists as ambassadors of Spain as well, and also the science that contributes more and more to reaching the goals of our diplomacy of the international cooperation in a world with many challenges and many crises, but also many opportunities ahead of it. We have for it a very solid network of embassies that channel our efforts and put all the human capital of our diplomats and also of our experts in cooperation allied with our scientists at the disposal of a science more and more open and more accessible. In the last year and in the framework of the Spanish presidency of the European Union, we have made a specific effort in order to increase those activities of science, diplomacy, technology and innovation, both in Europe as in the rest of the world. And if Europe is something in the world, it's just due to the science. Fruit of this effort in 2023, more than many embassies and cultural centers have participated in a program of science diplomacy with around 200 activities. During this year, we have been working on the common lines of the Spanish strategy of science, technology, and innovation, going into depth in the environment of women and science, the ODS 5 that is so important for a country that has a foreign policy and a cooperation that is defined as feminist, and also in the issues of environmental sustainability. We came just from the COP28, where the issue of innovation and science has been so evident. Art and science, open science, fight against the climate change, blue diplomacy, we think in green, but we have to think about oceans as well, and the sustainability of the oceans, all that from a holistic perspective, and always in the framework of obtaining the goals of the 2030 Agenda and the triple transition, a green transition, an economic transition that has to go through what is digital, and a social transition that can solve the inequalities and the gaps that exist in our societies. We still pursue the double goal of encouraging the internationalization of our science and at the same time, and not contradictorily, extend the knowledge network, stimulating the synergies between our scientific community and the scientific excellence centers of the other countries. In this endeavor, I would like to point out our collaboration with them, both scientists, both women and men in Spain, pooled in the network of associations of scientists and researchers in Spain abroad, RAICEX, that already has 22 associations worldwide, with the support of our diplomats and our embassies, with those we work tightly from its very creation. The Spanish presidency of the European Union has been a moment for a big, deep thought for us Spaniards and also for the European Union. As the Commissioner said, a moment for reflection and strategic redefinition as to science diplomacy. Maybe it was really a turning point and a new chapter with a vocation of growth in resources, going into depth in the already acquired commitments. We aspire on our side in the Spanish setting to strengthen the alliance with the other actors of science and technology and innovation, with the public actors, of course, the Ministry of Sciences and Universities, the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, the Superior Council of Scientific Research, and the other public bodies of research. We want to go into depth in this activity as well with the private sector, with the entrepreneurial world, and with the whole of the civil society, working to guarantee a transfer of knowledge that has to be more intense, more transparent, and an open science, a science open to the participation of the greatest possible amount of people. Our task and our mandate as specialized ministry in foreign affairs and as cooperation agency is aimed towards a greater cooperation of the different actors that on their own develop many initiatives allied with in line with the priorities of the foreign actions of Spain and with our interests and values. And there is no more fundamental value than the one of an open science, and a Spain and Europe that contribute with their science to solve the big global challenges, focusing on the best possible life conditions for the whole of the international community in a world filled with challenges, since the climate change lack of security in food, and also the obtention of peace that unfortunately is a very far goal in many places in the planet. In all of them, science may play an important role as a connecting point and a problem-solving agency. There is a huge task that is important to stop these common challenges with trying to look for multicultural solutions to very complex problems. A working style that, if you allow me to use these ODS 17 language of the in Europe spirit in the European environment where we are completely identified and involved. We want to drive science diplomacy strategy that collects the first priorities of the Spanish presidency as a gaze towards the future. We will join the drive of the European Agency for Science Diplomacy so that this first conference is no doubt the first great stimulus of this new stage. We will go advancing in the same track after Madrid Declaration, where they said that the role that science has to play as an important element of international relationships, a key factor to face the global challenges, inequalities, climate change, lack of food, and an efficient tool for the public diplomacy as well to improve our positioning as European Union and as of Spain in the world. We will still achieve activities that favor this in line with the Green European Pact, Green Agreement, thinking about those who will be affected by the very necessary transformations we have to do to preserve our planet. We are in favor of knowledge and scientific evidence to increase the welfare of the citizenship all in the analog and digital world by means of the improvement of the quality of the public policies, once again in analogic and digital space. We will contribute to a greater connection of innovation systems, facilitating the trans-border cooperation. We will collaborate for the consolidation of a sustainable, efficient, and peaceful use of oceans and space. We have foreseen to design a program of science diplomacy that emphasizes analogic transformation, especially sustainability, climate change, where our country is a landmark for that. In digital transition, that is also extremely relevant at a point in time where we are going to face the great challenge of the AI. That the European Union is the first space that has a specific legislation for this law on artificial intelligence, the Artificial Intelligence Act, and the ethical dilemmas in the change in neurosciences. We have to endeavor to be able to decrease the digital gap, guaranteeing the proper access of all people to the benefits of the new technologies. We want to drive the transfer of innovation, knowledge, from the labs to the companies, using the synergies of the virtuous circles that our network of embassies can generate between the academia, the small and medium-sized companies, multinationals, and scientists as well. We will keep on promoting the multidisciplinary approach between science and culture, two of the identities of the Spanish Agency of Cooperation, because this convergence between science and culture leads to interdisciplinary approach and generates new logic, because with science it's impossible to protect and spread our natural heritage, and we can't either stimulate the creative innovation. We will have activities that are destined to customized medicine, personalized medicine, and overall health. When we have been recovering from the greatest challenge of the last generation with the COVID, we will go on with our commitment with the plurilingualism in science, in the line following the science cooperation, in order to that benefit all the peoples and cultures and contribute to reduce the inequalities. That's why we bet for Spanish as a science language as well in the international setting. And we also have to join the digital literacy and the effort of the different capacities in our partner countries, those countries called from the global south, in all places in the world, of course, in the setting of the Mediterranean, dear Nasser, that is a special place for us, but also in Latin America and Caribbean and Africa and many other places. It's an ambitious agenda we have ahead of us, and we want to have the collaboration of all the agents in science, technology, and innovation in line with our colleagues of the 27 member states of the European Union who are represented here today. A few years ago, when I graduated from Master, these are a few years ago already, the discourse the closing this discourse was given by Leonardo Prodi, who said that Europe was a museum and it also should be a lab. I think that Europe has to be both things at the same time, and that's what we are trying to do. For that, we need to reach as soon as possible a European framework of science diplomacy in Europe in order to be able to look for common goals with these European values of open science and progress, sustainable development, and the holding of this European conference in the framework of the Spanish presidency that is about to finish is a very promising beginning with that we can all congratulate us for. Maybe now it's the hardest thing to start working together, hand in hand, to reach the goals that we have set before us. And for that, dear General Director, you're going to have the support of Spain, its diplomacy, and the Spanish cooperation in this project. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. And now, and closing this inaugural session, the Secretary of State from the Ministry of Science and Innovation and Universities, Mr. Juan Cruz Fico-Rosa, has the floor. Thank you. DG, European Commission, Secretary General, Secretary of Research, Universities, DG Planning, DG FICIT, DG Ramon Arresas Foundation, my dear friend Raimundo, thank you very much for opening your doors wide. And it's especially important this afternoon. What we want is for science to be even more relevant. On behalf of the Minister of Science, Innovation and Universities, who apologizes for not being with us this afternoon and who has asked me to step into her shoes, I would like to begin this conference by bringing to mind something that might seem to be self-evident, but which actually isn't. I'm talking about the sparks that fly when we join the words science and diplomacy. We run the risk of thinking that this has always existed, but that's not the case. There is an evolution of thinking which has a social impact. Diplomacy is the strategy of peoples to reach peace. In the face of the arguments that stand upon strength, this is an exercise of dialogue and respect between and among those who are different, who uphold different principles. Originally, diplomacy sought the dream of a common language which would allow for peoples to understand each other, because all of us want peace and development. Science, sometimes, not always, has been at the service of development. This happens, I think, with all human activities, but development and peace have been reached, especially when scientific and technological knowledge is really placed at the service of the common good, which is why this joining up of diplomacy and science is so important. This is a very important milestone for the European Union. It's the first time we address this issue. We've said it before, we'll say it again. For the government of Spain, it's a very important event also, because it is happening as scientific diplomacy is addressed in our country. Spanish scientists abroad are involved, among other stakeholders, and one of the closing events of the semester of the 6 months during which Spain presides the Union. Europe is definitely a powerhouse, and I think we all agree. European values stem from European values. Science has contributed to the construct of Europe and therefore is important in its diplomacy. We have upheld the idea that science be an essential lever to transform European policies at a time which is, of course, absolutely critical. European policies that guarantee or should guarantee the autonomy of Europe, and this thanks to an effort to, in a coordinated manner, achieve industrialization. These are policies that must allow us to adapt to climate change and that will allow us to segue fairly into this transition. Social justice, economic justice for all of Europe's citizens, men and women alike. Spain believes that fostering this diplomacy is essential. Spain, furthermore, has been a pioneer in wagering on this as an essential tool to deal with global challenges. Civil society, of course, has to be brought on board. Madrid actually was, as we said before, the headquarters 5 years ago of the Madrid Declaration. This is how it's known. 5 years ago, we were able to take advantage of this movement, which encouraged taking advantage of these important activities. And thus, this conference today is a first step. It allows us to be proud of the work achieved, and it allows us to look back on these 6 months of a Spanish presidency. I'd like to say that there are some important aspects that have to do with diplomacy and which we have taken very much into account during these 6 months of the presidency. 28 July, Santander was the place and date where we acknowledge the important role of science in our foreign policy and in our public policies. And we talked about the importance of reaching an agreement with our strategic allies. We have a number of persons who will vouch for the fact that during our presidency, we have defended an extension of the PRIMA program. This is an instrument which allows for research and innovation, which is absolutely essential for the Mediterranean region. It allows us to fight inequalities. It allows us to generate knowledge and to generate skills on both sides of the divide of the Mediterranean. Santander saw the conclusions and commitments, and in December, we held another meeting. A number of conclusions were reached regarding the bolstering of the role of research and innovation within the process of drafting union policies. This is an absolutely key part of the sum total. Also, collaboration between and among states and third parties. It's going to be essential for all of us, and it is indeed another one of the initiatives. Innovation, of course, which is part of the new European agenda. Of course, all of the hard work carried out is very important. We are hopeful regarding the achievements of this conference. This is a debate which will allow us to think about the framework that we need, which has been described in 2021 and which must include at least the inclusion of scientific knowledge in public foreign policy, a bolstering of scientific clout in statements, more involvement of scientific experts and commissioners. We're convinced that by fostering science, the common denominator, the result will be societies that are stronger, more fair, more democratic. We know that doubtless the result will be a better prepared Europe, a Europe that will be, I repeat, better prepared to deal with the challenges that lie ahead. This is an ambitious framework for collaboration, so I'm going to once again thank the Commission, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Spain. Thank you for your contribution to the organization of this conference, which we have, of course, participated in together with FACIT. Thank you very much, and I bid you excellent results.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our distinguished authorities for their words of welcome.
An esteemed audience here today with us to discuss and explore altogether the intersection between science and diplomacy and its profound impact on the European landscape. This conference, as it has been said, serves as a significant ending to the Spanish presidency of the Council of the European Union. Over the course of this term, we have hosted a series of successful events, from the global dimension of research infrastructures to advancing healthcare for improved quality of life, and from exploring diverse research careers to showcasing the progress of the new European innovation agenda. We take pride in highlighting the achievements and positive outcomes stemming of these activities. So before we begin now, just a few practical details. In an effort to enhance your experience and your participation, we encourage you to actively participate through Slido.com. You can just scan this code on your mobile phone or go to Slido.com and you can use this hashtag and you can join the conversation there. And also, if you want to share the conversation on social media, you can also use this hashtag. So, coming back to our topic today, science diplomacy, as it has been also said, today marks the occasion to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Madrid Declaration on Science Diplomacy, which has been endorsed by over 200 experts since its adoption in December 2018. So to provide further insight in this matter, I would like to invite to the stage my colleague in FECID, Ana Elorza, and that she's also the current chair of the European Science Diplomacy Alliance. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos, señores y señoras.
Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to speak in English.
Here today, I'm really proud to be here as the chair of the Alliance. FECID, the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, has the privilege to be the current chair of the Alliance. We will be finishing our mandate on next year in July 24. And I would like to tell you a little bit about the Alliance and our history, also FECID interlinked with the work with the European Commission all along these years. So the European Science Diplomacy Alliance was launched, as the director just mentioned, from 3 Horizon 2020 projects, S4D4C, INSIDE, and ELFECID. Those projects were truly complementary and interconnected all along the way, and I will talk about them a little bit later. These projects decided, after they finished, to create an interface platform to foster network and not to lose all the resources that we had created together. And I want to stress here that that was really a bottom-up collaboration on the voluntary effort of so many people, so many institutions, happy to be working together and happy to maintain all this momentum that we have after everything that had happened during those years. So nowadays, in the morning, we celebrated our sixth Global Assembly, and we are 32 members and global partners included. So we wanted to have an inclusion of different partners, also civil society, citizens, different global partners that are also have a voice and has a say in the international community. Why the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology? For us, it was very logical, because the foundation, what it's doing is connecting science and society. So for us, it was very natural to be part of this conversation, to take science beyond the bench, to take science and knowledge to other sectors in society, to diplomats, and I will tell you a little bit further, but to do and to work science for policy in every single step of the way. So we were part, as I said, of this process. Why were we in one of those European projects? Because the Spanish way in science diplomacy has been working before all that in a very choral effort, together hand by hand with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Spanish researchers abroad. We deployed 3 scientists, and I was one of them, in Washington, D.C., to work hand by hand with the Scientific Diplomatic Service, and we had also in mind an open and truly collaboration with the Spanish researchers. I wrote here 24 associations already. I think someone said 23, but this was growing in the 5 continents, and we were able to start a truly collaboration year after year, as it was mentioned by the Secretary of State. We celebrate in 2 days the 8th meeting of the Spanish network science diplomacy. What happened in those embassies was magical. We were able to work together with our national colleagues, but also to include in the conversation the European Commission delegations. So for instance, in Washington, D.C., we were able to work hand by hand with the scientific counselor, James Gavigan, and we're able to organize somehow annual meetings with the different European researchers' diasporas in the US. So that meeting is still going on, I think, and now we know that UK, the Spanish scientists in the UK have got a very nice grant from the European Commission to do the same thing after Brexit in the UK. So we have this triangle of administration, society, and scientists going on all the time. This opens to new career pathways. Is it the same to be a scientist now that it used to be? Is it the same to be a diplomat? Do we need to change few things to work in a different manner? Then the 3 European projects were funded, so the Commission was still there supporting the efforts of the member states. And I would say that I couldn't now mention all the outputs that those projects had. There were a lot of papers, concepts, and other important resources. But overall, I think they were inspiring a large community of scholars and diplomats that wanted to have a different vision and a different way of working. The Madrid Declaration was mentioned. This was something that happened in Madrid, so I'm very proud of this. And the European Science Diplomacy Alliance is now consolidated, as I said. We are looking for a very promising future, hand by hand with the European Commission and the member states. But I want to pass here also another message. The EU is also exploring this framework and working hand by hand with the civil society via different ways. You could see here some of those examples that were pushing those people to continue to work, to foster this bottom-up initiative by top-down support. And this was, I think, the nice recipe for success. The Alliance is participating in the steering team and in the working groups, and we will be there for the whole next 6 months to support and to advance this framework that we think is very, very much important. Finally, I would like to say that in this journey, we were in a win-win situation, because us, as the Spanish Foundation, learn from best practices all around the world. And we discover how other countries were taking science into other sectors of society. Like that, we could make really important steps in Spain, having relevant institutional innovations as the Science and Technology Office in the Spanish Congress of Deputies that I'm really proud to coordinate with my colleague Izaskun Lacunza. And we are now part of the EPTA network, which is also part STOA at the European Union and other important institutions. So science diplomacy brings us also new ways of understanding science, and we learned also from our colleagues. And now what I would like to let as a final message is we should really go towards a collective intelligence. I always say this because it's new mindset for scientists, for diplomats. Please, let's think about new interface institutions that can help us to think differently, and also new career paths that could integrate interdisciplinary knowledge, always taking into consideration social science and humanities in order to see the full picture. So let's go for a systemic change, a new way of working, and Spain will always be there together with the European Union institutions, because we win and you win, and it's a nice way of working and co-creating together. So join our science diplomacy community, please.
Very bien. Thank you very much, Anna. So let's start with the first roundtable of the conference now, a new European framework for science diplomacy. So to moderate this panel, I want to welcome Gianmarco Müller, Coordinator for Science Diplomacy and Multilateral Relations of the Directorate General of Research and Innovation of the European Commission. Thank you very much.
Okay, our panelists can join me right away. take a picture first, okay?
Yep.
Good. So welcome to this opening high-level panel of this conference. My name is Jan-Marco Müller. I coordinate science diplomacy and multilateral relations at DG Research and Innovation, the European Commission. And we are having a really stellar panel here to open this conference. And I take a quote from the speech of the State Secretary. He finished his speech with the words, "Ahora vamos a trabajar." So let's get
to work.
Discuss in this panel a new European framework for science diplomacy. Before we get to the discussion, I want to briefly introduce our panelists. We have already heard the Spanish State Secretary, Juan Cruz Sigudosa. I should add, you have been appointed a week ago, so you're fresh in your job. Congratulations. But you are not at all fresh to the topic of science diplomacy, because you have had a very distinguished career as a researcher, a biologist by training, specialized in human genetics, worked in doctoral and postdoctoral studies in Sweden and the UK and US. You also funded a company.
Yep.
So he has really seen science from the inside and outside in many ways, and now venturing into the area of policy making. Then we have on my side Maria Cristina Russo. She's the Director for International Cooperation in DG Research and Innovation of the European Commission. Cristina looks back on a distinguished career in the European Commission. She has worked in the cabinet of former Research Commissioner Philippe Busquin. That was the time when actually the term European Research Area was coined and invented. So she was part of that. She worked later also for the Secretary General of the European Commission. And now in the past 10 years, looking after the international cooperation in research and innovation in the European Commission. Then we have Lina Galvez Munoz, member of the European Parliament. Welcome. You're the vice chair of the ITRE committee, and everybody who knows about research policies in Brussels knows about the ITRE committee. So that's the parliament committee that deals with industry, research, and energy. And you're also a member of STOA, the Science and Technology Options Assessment, which certainly many of you will know about, which advises in a foresight sense the European Parliament on technologies that are developing. You're also vice president of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. And of course, you also have a career as a researcher, and have also been a vice rector of your university in Sevilla, and also worked as a research minister of Andalusia. So welcome, great to have you on board of our panel. Then we have connected online Marek Konaszewski. Marek Konaszewski is the president of the Polish Academy of Sciences. But what makes his career really interesting is he worked 5 years as a science counselor of Poland in the embassy in Washington, D.C. And afterwards, several years as a science advisor to the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs. And now he's the president of the Polish Academy of Sciences, so you have seen science and diplomacy from both sides of the fence. And finally, last but not least, Eric Talon, who's the cultural counselor of France here at the embassy in Spain, and he's also the director of the Institut Français here in Madrid, and but also has a long career in diplomacy. So also he worked as a counselor to an advisor to the President of the Republic. You also served as a cultural counselor in Italy. So also had several diplomatic postings. So my first question to this panel is, we have been talking already now about a new European framework for science diplomacy. Why do we need such a framework? Isn't it enough if, member states just do what they like in science diplomacy? I don't know, Mr. State Secretary, you touched a little bit on the topic already.
Okay.
But why we actually need a framework?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me for this roundtable. As you said before, I mentioned some of the items in my previous introduction, so I don't want to repeat them, but I think it's important to put on the table that a European framework is needed for several reasons. One is that, as I mentioned before, European Union is a scientific world reference, and we should use this strength to actually support our agenda, especially for expanding what we need about, enlarging the national interest in economy and democratic values. I think that bringing together scientific strength and diplomacy definitely will help us to afford in a better way the challenges that we have as a society. I think that also, as I mentioned, science and research are at the core of the European Union, and the construction has to be founded in this kind of pillars. I think Spain has also a special, if you allow me, interest in doing this kind of work. Our country has been pioneering putting science into diplomacy, into the EU and national agenda. Just a few examples. Premier Initiative, we have been very lucky that we have agreed on the extension of the program until 2027 as a main element in scientific collaboration between countries focusing on one single problem or challenge. At the last council, Compet Council, we approved actually the conclusions on strengthening the role and impact on research and innovation in policy-making processes. Something that is very important, I think is one of the core buildings of this meeting. These conclusions include that the role of science in public policy process improve the life of people and improve democracy. I think finally, under our presidency, we are actually co-hosting this very event, which I think is important, and put into the front of the table again the importance and leverage capacity that science can have for diplomacy and vice versa. Thanks to the European research area, our research ecosystems are already used to work together, which is a unique advantage, and this can be fostered one of the pillars of science diplomacy. And then to finish up, just one of the challenges that we have, and that makes necessary this science diplomacy agenda, is we have to agree on a common understanding of the values and principles that are needed to entail scientific and reciprocal collaboration and cooperation. I think this point will be discussed among the ministers next February in Brussels under the Belgian presidency. And also, we have to do something special that is also, I think, still ongoing, and it should be put into the agenda. It's a benchmarking exercise. We have to know which are our capacities, our abilities, and the know-how that we have in Europe that we have to enjoy, reinforce, and expand.
Yes, thank you very much. You pointed to the fact that research is at the very core of the European project, and also, of course, relates to issues like values and principles. So it is a point to get Christina in. How does actually this science diplomacy framework and science diplomacy in general fit into the wider picture of research and innovation policies in the Union?
Thank you very much, Gianmarco. Let me say, first of all, how happy I'm here with such a discuss about science diplomacy. Not easy for me to speak after the commissioner, after the director general, but still bringing some aspects from the European perspective. And in terms of why do we need a European framework for science diplomacy, I think that we should highlight three main concepts. The first one is impact, and the Secretary of State highlighted to that. The second is values and principles, and that's what we discussed, and also multilateralism. Let me say that in terms of impact, we have heard about the initiatives that some member states, for example, Spain, we had this very eloquent presentation by Ana Elorza explaining all the activities that Spain has in terms of science diplomacy. Other member states have also those activities outside Europe, and we as European Commission also, we have a network of science counselors that cooperate with member states outside Europe, but we do not have the impact that we should have as Europe. Europe if we continue to work in a scattered way. So this is why, I mean, it's important to have a European agenda for science diplomacy that allows us to do what is very dear to Europe, to our president, to the president of the Commission, of course, which set as one of the priorities for our mandate to have Europe stronger in the world. And we have seen with the crisis that we had in the world how much it is important. So that is, in order to have an impact, I think we need really to have a framework. This framework needs to be based on values and principles. And there, of course, I refer to the global approach to research and innovation, which my Director General has highlighted in his speech. The global approach is based on the values of principle of the European Union. And as it was mentioned by the State Secretary, we have a dialogue which was launched by the then French presidency, with the then French presidency of the Council, on values and principles, a multilateral dialogue to which also Lina has participated in one of the events that will bring us to a ministerial meeting next year. And within this multilateral dialogue, we have science diplomacy as one of the key elements that we want to promote, an element that embeds those values and principles of research and innovation at European level. And we want to transpose, and I get to the third point, at multilateral level. We need to be stronger as Europe, we need to be stronger in the world, and the work that we are doing through science diplomacy has a huge impact in the different multilateral setting. We have been seeing it in the G7, we have been seeing it in the G20. I was with Rachel in Mumbai, and if you see the declaration of the G20 ministerial in Mumbai, there is a specific reference to the importance of science diplomacy in order to tackle those global challenges, and that is a reference that has been included thanks to this joint effort that we have done at the European Union level in order to promote science diplomacy in our endeavors outside Europe.
Thank you very much, Christina. Lina Gálvez-Muñoz, so you have worked both in science and in policy making. Seeing now from the view of the European Parliament, why do you think that we need a European framework for science diplomacy?
Well, first of all, thank you really very much for being here. It's a topic that is very close to my heart, both in my academic experience that was international career, so it's really based on this international cooperation, and also for my work at the European Parliament that I've been dealing with many files that were in which science diplomacy was central, including the PRIMA agreement. We finished really last week, and I was one of the rapporteurs. I think I will highlight three aspects which I think are important. The first one is that challenges, actual ongoing challenges, are global challenges. So we really need a common answer or a cooperation in order to answer them, or at least to cope with them. The second issue I would like to highlight is that the world is really changing. The geopolitical scenario is really changing very, very deeply. Regionalizing, well, I will mention that later on. And finally, that democracy is under threat. And for that, we need also science diplomacy very much. So the first thing is we already know, we have already mentioned that our challenges are really global, are huge. Climate change has been mentioned. Digitalization could be another challenge. And obviously, the size and the speed of these challenges are so fast that any country, no country, even a big country, can do it on its own. No European country even has the size for that. So we really need cooperation. We really need to cope that. It is not only good for development, peace and development, as we have already said, but also for science. Science in itself is based on cooperation. So if we want to move the scientific frontier, we really need this cooperation. And it has always been the case. I mean, this has always been important, this science, diplomacy, and cooperation. But now I will say it is more important than ever. It was the Secretary of State, Juan Cruz Sigudosa, saying before about strategic autonomy, how important it is. We came out with this concept after the COVID, after the Ukraine war, but it is becoming more and more and more important. Each day we wake up with a new threat. Now it's been the stop in international trade because of the Gaza war. So every single day we really, the world is changing. The globalization, as we knew, is regionalizing. There is really this decoupling among different parts of the world. So we really need to work with our like-minded partners in order really to achieve this strategic autonomy within Europe, and also to cope with the twin transition that are deep structural changes. And for that we need science. And as I was saying before, science is cooperative in itself. And the last point I wanted to highlight is that probably it's too strong to say that democracy is under threat, but it is. It is. And so is the European project, because it's based on democracy and in fundamental values. And there are, many alternative models and even economic interests that are really trying to empty, at least to empty the democracy. And one of the things is through disinformation. And for that, we really need science to be at the core of whatever we do, because it will be the best way to fight disinformation and to help people in the decision-making, not only politicians, that of course is what we do in STOA and in other panels, but also citizens that really need to have a better scientific culture or literacy in order to fight disinformation, because unless we do that, we could be really losing the core of our values and even of our common European project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We refer to the global challenges we are facing, but also to the geopolitical forces that are working against international cooperation. And this is a good moment to bring in Marek Konaszewski, who is connected online, president of the Polish Academy of Sciences. If you can provide a view from academia, why, from an academic point of view, should we have a European framework for science diplomacy? Marek, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we do.
Fantastic. First and foremost, apologies for not being with you in person. I was tested COVID positive right before I departed from Warsaw, so unfortunately I had to stay at home. But nevertheless, I'm very happy to be with you, at least online. And let me just spend a few minutes on a few topics that I think are particularly important with respect to the Academy of Sciences. But not only. Let me just bring you to your attention one very important aspect of our activity, which normally would not be so highlighted, and this is the support we provided, not only Polish Academy, but academies throughout Europe and also in the United States, to scientific refugees from Ukraine. We have already spent several $1 million and several million of euros on supporting Ukrainian scientists, and it wouldn't be possible without the collaboration between academies. And of course, as you've already mentioned, our main goal is to provide solutions to global problems, but also I think the solution to ongoing problems is as important as tackling these big global issues. And I think that we did a really good job in providing a sustained support, and also thinking of this support as a starting point to build Ukrainian infrastructure, scientific infrastructure in the future. I was very happy to see a tremendous progress in Ukrainian succession to European Union. And definitely science and science diplomacy should play a major role in this accession, because without us, I believe that Ukrainians won't be able to build a good scientific infrastructure that would eventually absorb European support to Ukraine. So I would say, from my perspective particularly, this is the major challenge that we all face, and I'm afraid that, at least at the moment, we don't have a good scenario for the help of our, how to help Ukrainian friends. So this is one of the issues that I would think should be on our agenda in the nearest future and the years to come. The other thing from the academic perspective is how to tackle the collaboration with the Russian and Belarusian academies. As for now, we have suspended all collaboration, which does not mean that we don't collaborate with individual scientists, but this is again a big question: how should we all behave towards, let's say, eventual collaboration with the countries that are difficult partners at the moment. So these are just two issues that I would like to broad, taking into account my specific point of view. Otherwise, of course, I must say that both European Union as such, but also the academies are a wonderful venue for collaboration between European nations. Just to mention a very good example, next door I host a number of Spanish students visiting my faculty under Erasmus framework. It wouldn't be possible without European collaboration. This is just one of the examples that bring together us as Europeans under the umbrella of European exchange frameworks. So overall, I believe that being a representative of a country that joined European Union in 2004, and let me tell you that this was a success story, even though in the last years, I must admit, we had a quite difficult time internally in Poland with respect to the interaction with the government. But otherwise, I believe that this, in this ongoing project of deepening European collaboration, this, let's say, East European perspective is very promising. I think that just using the academies as a vehicle of this collaboration, we can all achieve something that without the academies would be more difficult. And this is the streamlining and this collaboration in the first place, shaping it up around a well-centered institutions that actually are the core of this scientific progress. And without this network of collaboration of institutions, scientific institutions, the political umbrella of this collaboration would be simply fruitless. So overall, I believe that we have a lot to offer, particularly when we are faced with this big challenge eastwards. Well, let me tell you, I'm saying these words sitting just 40 kilometers from Belarusian border. So I feel this pressure really, and we will have a lot to do together. I hope very soon to repair all these damages that has been done by Russian aggression towards Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marek. Yeah, thank you very much for making reference to the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine and the challenges it poses for science diplomacy, but of course also all the good work academies and universities and research institutions are doing to support Ukrainian science. And let me also say that we all appreciate that you joined this panel despite being confined to home, and we all wish you, of course, a speedy recovery.
Thank you very much.
Now to Eric Talon. So Eric, you have worked for many years in diplomacy as a diplomat, as a career diplomat. So, but always also been in topics related to science. So what is your take from a diplomatic point of view?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. I just wanted to remind some facts before giving you my answer. On December 7th, President Macron announced the creation of a Presidential Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. This initiative illustrates the importance given to science in the state's action to address the challenges in our country at its highest level, for every kind of politics, but especially for foreign policy. I think it's an important fact. Indeed, framed within an international context, which is becoming more critical, collaboration in science allows us to contribute to solving major global crises, in particular the energy, environmental, food, and health crises. These common challenges require us to structure a collective action even more effectively, especially at European level. Indeed, science being at the forefront of high-level international negotiations, G7, G20, COPs, it's more important than ever to formulate and promote a common scientific policy on the international stage, country by country, sector by sector. With regard to this context, I see several reasons for which we need a European framework for our science diplomacy. First reason, strategical autonomy. For Europe to be a major player in higher education and research, it is a condition for sovereignty. A framework for science diplomacy would, for instance, allow us to create better synergies between our national recovery plans in the service of Europe's numerical and ecological transition. And I think that's a very important point. Second reason, in the context of geopolitical tensions, science diplomacy should be understood as a means of asserting our European values on our democracy models. In that respect, the French presidency of the EU last year has been a first step towards the European framework for science diplomacy with the adoption of La Déclaration de Marseille, and we now need to see together how we can implement it. Furthermore, I would like to underline the importance of building this framework on the basis of what we already achieved, such as a toolbox of scientific diplomacy and the necessity to create a bridge between this European framework and the program Horizon Europe. It is also essential to continue to work closely with our higher education institutions on strategic issues, especially in terms of influence and security. Exchanges already exist, and this European framework should allow us not to leave unanswered questions concerning issues such as China, Russia, India, or African countries.
Yes, thank you very much. Some very important points you mentioned, such as strategic autonomy, technological sovereignty. There's, of course, issues that are very much on the radar of the diplomats, and certainly one topic science diplomacy needs to deal with. Now, I would like to bring you all into the debate for the first time. We have prepared a Slido question for you. I think it was already briefly visible. So if you can go to slido.com and use the hashtag EUSkyDipMadrid. And the question we want to ask you is, what will be the most important success factor for developing a European framework for science diplomacy? And we are giving you four options, and you can choose only one. Which do you think is the most important one? Is it that, well, we need to increase awareness of what science diplomacy is and what it can do, because it's still a very fluffy term and many people do not know what to relate to it? Is this really the problem we need to tackle? Or is it increasing team spirit between member states to act jointly in a strategic manner, because we are still running in different directions and need to act strategically together in a European level? Or is it that we need to increase the institutional linkages between the science and diplomacy spheres in terms of creating spaces for interactions, in terms of bringing together foreign and research policy instruments? Or is it the more down-to-earth issues like the support in terms of funding and training? So which of these do you think is the most important success factor to get to achieve a European framework for science diplomacy? We are going to look at the answers in a few minutes, so we are not in a hurry. We're going to keep the questions here. And in the meantime, while you put your votes, I have a few questions again to our panelists here. And the first one is to State Secretary Cruz Sigurdosa. We have heard that Spain is a pioneer in science diplomacy, but what is it that Europe can actually learn from Spain?
Thank you. I was trying to figure out which will be my answer to the question, but we'll discuss that later. I think, as you say, there is some of the work that we have already said in this panel. Among them, if I had to pick up something that will explain the Spain role in all this process, is the global issue. So I think today, research performing organizations, interface institutions, companies, foundations, non-governmental organizations, and other civil society all play a different role in science and diplomacy. So actually, I think science diplomacy is today more than ever a collaborative and multi-agent effort. And one cannot be right when you're planning strategies, you don't take into account this diversity. I think we have to be ahead of that. I think Spanish diplomacy, what we did is to open the sectors to a frank dialogue. Our science diplomacy is oriented to achieve some kind of initiatives like promoting research in innovation in a collaborative way, to facilitate research mobility, to enhance our country's specific best pieces to work with, to integrate all this diversity in the formulation of our foreign policy objectives. I think that a transversal vision of science and our firm conviction that science has a say on every matter. We have adopted that. I think that is important. Among this, we cannot forget people. I think people is one of the major issues that we have to be taking into account. We have from the very beginning collaborated with the Spanish civil society through the network of associations of Spanish researchers and scientists abroad. It's called RAICEX. That means to work and to dialogue and to talk with more than 24 associations represented in all continents that bring together over 4,000 researchers. We have to listen to them. Another key element is the collaboration, and this event is one of the examples, the collaboration of our Ministry of Science, Innovation and Universities with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I think this is the message is that we have to work together to support a network of scientific diplomacy and embassies in international organizations. This collaboration has nothing to do but to invigorate research and innovation, both a word that we have heard before, bilaterally and multilaterally. I think the network that we are creating in Spain in diplomacy around science engage with representative of civil society and the counterparts in science. We have clear conceptions that science and scientists do have to work in the linkage, towards solving citizen problems. We have to be focused. We have to know what we are doing. I think that is, to me, one of the main importance. We have to be focused. Science is here for helping citizens to have a better lives. And that is the issue that we're doing also from our foreign diplomatic science agenda.
Very well, thank you. I think very important point, the one about networks, that also resonate with what Anna Elorza in her talk early on mentioned. Christina, when we think about the Council conclusions on the global approach, we usually talk about, yes, Council asked us to develop a European science diplomacy agenda, and sometimes the overlooked, there's also another sentence in this Council conclusions, which is about integrating the global approach into the EU's external actions. So actually, does science diplomacy fit into the EU's external actions as part of the global approach?
Yes, thank you, Gianmarco. I think it does fit a lot. I will prevent from trying to reply to those questions because I have a strong preference for one, but I reply to your question now. Yes, it does. It does. I think that we need to see it from 2 points of view. First of all, how it fits into the policy declarations, the policy documents and declarations, which are important because they are the compass of action at EU level. And there we can see more and more of policy communications, joint communications between the European Commission and the European External Action Service, which refer to science diplomacy, to the fact of foreign policy being based on scientific evidence. And I mean, I can quote many of them, the joint communication on the EU's contribution to rules-based multilateralism, the communication on the Arctic strategy. We know how much Arctic is important for science diplomacy, the strategic compass for security and defense, the communication on climate nexus, security nexus, and most important, I think, the communication on the global gateway, which also makes the link with the second point that I would like to make, because it is counting on policy communication, but on concrete actions. And that is what I would like to highlight. The global gateway is the EU framework for external action, for engaging with the global south. What makes it different from other initiatives, like, for example, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, it is that the global gateway is based on those values and principles that we want to defend at European level, that are so well explained and put forward in the global approach and in the work that we're doing at multilateral dialogue. It is based on Team Europe approach, which has been highlighted also in the introductory remarks as one of the key elements for science diplomacy, and that I also picked up beforehand. And within this context, science has an important role because indeed research and innovation, research and education are concrete elements of this global gateway. Let me take one example, which is very timely. Today, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is in Africa. She has visited Kenya and Rwanda. And in Rwanda, she has signed, together with President Kagame, an alliance on supporting the development of a mRNA vaccine factory by BioNTech, which, by the way, is the company that invented the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which, by the way, was supported by the European Union Research Framework Program. And I think this is a concrete example that shows how much science is important within the EU's external action, because if we didn't have science engagement with the President, would not be there signing this strategic alliance with the President of Rwanda, which is indeed very important for external action, because as you know, and I don't need to underline, Rwanda plays a key role in our relations with Africa, notably for all the issues related to migration. I will have the occasion to speak about PRIMA in the next panel, so I will not speak about that now, but I think that if you want to say something that shows how the European Commission is concrete in promoting science diplomacy and in putting it in place. I think that both the setting of PRIMA in 2024 and the renewal of PRIMA now, it's really a self-speaking example.
Thank you. I'm keeping the suspense on the question and target a question to Lina Galvez Munoz. So you're a voice of parliaments here on this panel. What role does science diplomacy play in the European Parliament, and what actually role could the Parliament also play in developing such a framework?
So we are already, I think we are already playing, and Maria Cristina Russo knows very well we are working very close together. So I would like probably to highlight 4 things, and the first one probably will be coordination with other European Union institutions, especially the Commission, with Maria Cristina, as I have mentioned before, but also with the Council and the different member states, and obviously the Presidency. I would like to mention also here Raquel Lloti, that we prefer very much this priority of the Spanish Presidency with PRIMA. And so this is a very important aspect. I think coordination within the European Union institutions, including obviously member states, but also with other institutions such as UNESCO, that is also developing very much on science diplomacy, or other institutions as the STS Forum that takes place every year in Kyoto, in Japan. And we are present from the European Parliament every year. They are especially working on this science diplomacy. The second issue is working on specific files on science diplomacy. PRIMA is probably one of the best or most recent example, but there are others, as all the also associations. It's very frequent for us to receive, or it has been very frequent to receive, for instance, UK members just pushing to come back to Horizon Europe, or New Zealand, or also when going to mission to, I don't know, South Korea. Well, we went to North Korea, actually, when we were to South Korea mission, and or to Japan, in order really to work on these international associations for Horizon Europe. So we are very active. Well, the members of parliament that are very active in science, that I have to say, unfortunately, we are not many. But the ones we are very active, especially on that. And the third issue I would like to highlight, it is not only in a specific files that are obviously very much related to science diplomacy, as cooperation agreements like PRIMA, or these international associations that other countries are joining Horizon Europe, but also how to include science at the core of other files or directive, as for instance the SHIPS Act, that it is essential, this international cooperation is essential in order to achieve strategic autonomy that we were telling before, and how important innovation and science is within it. And what we are developing is exactly this, this scientific diplomacy and this, let's say, this scientific work. We have also, we do not only belong to specific commissions, but also to delegations. In my case, to the US delegation. So each time, and she knows very well because each time I go to the US for a delegation, I said there is something I could push on science and on science diplomacy there. So we are all the time doing that. And the last point probably to highlight is STOA. I think we are doing a great job in STOA. And it is a model probably to follow as a scientific and technological panel within Parliament, and there we are doing really, I think, a great job on that, especially our participation on the STS Forum, that it is, I think, now a kind of a Davos for science, and we were together also last year also with Maria Cristina there, and trying also to obviously to work on with the Association of Japan, but not only. It is also, I think, a good job. What we have to do more on that, it is probably to have more members of the European Parliament involved in those issues. But for that, probably society would need to also to be much more involved on science, and also government also to be a priority, because at the end there are other things that will get out in the press or in the television, but science is rarely on that. So we really need to make more conscious the society, because there are a lot of common public goods that we really need to protect. And for that, we will need a lot of science diplomacy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And for this reason, actually, it's very important to have scientific voices in Parliament who can influence these debates. And thank you also for mentioning the issue of association to Horizon Europe. I know that associating New Zealand to Horizon Europe sounds to some like Australia participating in the Eurovision Song Contest. But actually, of course, it's not just research policy motivation, it's also foreign policy motivations, of course, behind such processes. And Marek, I would like to bring you in at this point. I mentioned at the beginning that you have seen science diplomacy from both sides of the fence. So you have worked in diplomacy, you're working in science now. What are your personal insights which you have gained from working at this interface?
One take-home lesson for myself was that we need more scientists turned science diplomats. It doesn't mean that we need to invite them to join diplomatic corps, but rather to master this, let's say, the basics of diplomacy, so they will help us and help the whole system to be more effective. As for now, science diplomacy is still, I would say, not well known in scientific circles. If you ask the scientists about science diplomacy, they would eventually refer to some social studies and so on, whereas it's our task to make them aware that each one of them, particularly those that are active in international collaborations, are in fact science diplomats. So I believe that our effort to bring science diplomacy into, let's say, diplomacy circles and solidify our impact on, let's say, European policy through science diplomacy will not be effective unless we will have a really numerous scientists understanding what we do and joining us. And with that, I would bring you for consideration at least one point. There are a number of scientists that already participated in different advisory mechanisms at different levels of the European Parliament, and not only. They left because their term ended, and they are left behind. I think that these are people that we should, let's say, engage again in building this infrastructure and in this networks among the scientists themselves, and reach to them anytime we need, let's say, their support within the scientific community for our actions, because without that, we'll be isolated from actually what we really need as the engine of the whole enterprise. So I was very much missing this during my time at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because particularly in Poland at that time, I had very few colleagues, scientists, that would be willing to help me, because they said, well, I don't have time to join you in this effort. It's pointless because this is pure politics. I don't want to engage in it, and so on. So I think that we are discussing, of course, let's say, strengthening science diplomacy within, let's say, policy making, which has a really important point on its own right. But on the other hand, we should also address scientific circles. So this is the message that I would like to convey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, also for sharing your reflections on the role of science diplomats. And we all know there are many of them here in the room, including people who work actually in embassies and delegations. So a question over to Eric. From the French perspective, I mean, could European framework for the science diplomacy, what kind of experience could we draw on, which you have in France?
Well, never ask to a French diplomat how he can support, because he can speak for hours. So I will try to sum up. And I would say that we would be pleased to put our experience and good practices at the service of the common European strategy, including a vast diplomatic network, the third largest in the world, among which 115 positions for scientific. Several members of this network will be taking part in the 5 working groups involved in setting up the framework. So I want to emphasize this fact. In addition to the budget devoted to this huge network, the budget allocated by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs to the teaching and research dimension of our influence amounts to approximately 100 million euros per year. French scientific diplomacy is also deployed via a network of operators, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs directly manages a number of research organizations. In doing so, diplomats provide France and Europe with precious information on the trends and forces at play. Our scientific diplomacy also relies on a number of instruments, the implementation of which is tailored to the research profile of our partners. For example, we have some 30 joint French country science and technology committees, and this is very important. France also has experience in organizing major conferences blending diplomacy and science, such as One Planet Summit Initiative, or in 2024, le Sommet de la Francophonie, which will also have a very strong scientific dimension. French diplomacy is therefore very active on the subject of science diplomacy and would be glad to put this experience at the service of an efficient European science diplomacy agenda. This includes working increasingly as Team Europe and promoting this agenda at its own internationally. To conclude, we are committed to assert Europe's role as a top-level scientific player, supported by all our ambitious diplomacies. The first milestone is, of course, France's participation in the Horizon Europe program and European university alliances, but we are ready for it to go much further, participating actively in the construction of a European diplomacy, balancing properly risk and opportunity, collaboration and sovereignty. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. You actually mentioned also the issue of funding, so that's a good moment to get back to our question. And if our technical colleagues can show us the results, perhaps. Okay, so increasing institutional linkages between science and diplomacy was seen as the most critical success factor, but also the other ones not that far away back. Increasing practical support for providing funding and training, increasing awareness of science is a little bit less the team spirit issue. Any comments from your side here on the panel to this? I don't know, Christina, do you want to comment?
Obviously, the reply that I liked more was not the most popular, but as a European Commission civil servant, I think that it's really important that when we act together with the member states, and the Team Europe approach is the only way forward if you want to increase in the world the impact of science diplomacy. But of course, I mean, the other are equally important, and in the agenda that we are developing, that we will discuss also this afternoon, we are looking at the overall approach related to the different angles of science diplomacy.
I think this is there's something missing on that 4 answers. I mean, from the point of view of an exam, you're doing an exam, I will be missing, I'm missing the 5th one, which is all are complementary. All are right and complementary. So I think to make people choose, it's not a good option. Most of all, when we are talking about diplomacy, this is not diplomatic. I think, just a message, quick message, I think all of them are complementary. I think the science diplomacy framework is going to be very complex. So, and we have to deal with complexity. And we have to be clear that this framework has to foster international collaboration, establishing links between researchers, policymakers, and diplomats. And which is more important, I think this framework should include all these points in early research and diplomatic careers, because this is not now. So I think one of the main issues that is not there is that we should put it into the agenda also in the training information of these people.
Okay, very good. Any other comments?
Yes, except that it's true that they are all linked. My preference will be the last one, the big one, because I think it's really the important one, unfortunately, even if you think it is the key issue, because sometimes still we have not enough a European agenda, a more specific member state agenda in science. And we really need a more European agenda, obviously coming from the European Parliament, but obviously for a member state, but still we really need to move forward this more European agenda. And unfortunately, not all member states have the same commitment to science. And unfortunately, it is dependent not only in the tradition and strength of science in each member state, but also sometimes on the color of the government. Now we are seeing that many governments are going towards populism and extreme right, and right with extreme right, and they are not supporting science or scientific knowledge, and they are even moving to fake news and disinformation. And this is something that worries me a lot. So this working together, this increasing team spirit between member states to jointly in strategic manner, it will become more and more difficult if the election results are going in the same direction that we have seen in the last year, except here in Spain, I have to say.
Okay, so combating populism is another success factor. Eric or Marek, whoever would, if you want to join. Well, Eric? Yeah.
I think the problem is not the linkage between science and diplomacy, but really the relationship between scientists and diplomats. And well, this area, to help, I think we absolutely need an appropriate training. It's a key point especially for diplomats. Also to strengthen the communication channel between them, and at least to improve the coordination to identify better defensive and offensive interests for both fields.
Okay, Marek, any comment from your side?
Yeah, it's difficult after all these wonderful statements, but still, all I can say is that I like all the items, but perhaps I should stress this team spirit that is much needed. And I'm in a particular position to say that in the last couple of years I was watching, let's say, a lot of criticism voiced by Polish government towards European Union, and I see the bad results of it within the country. So definitely we need to get together and have this team spirit rebuilt. Otherwise, the European Union will be weakened as the project. And once we are weakened, then of course all these threats looming from the outside will be even more dangerous. So team spirit in the first place.
Okay, thank you. We have another 10 minutes or so for questions from you, from the audience, either here in the room or also from those connecting online using Slido. So if anybody here would have a question, that just raise your hand and then wait until the mobile microphone reaches you. Is there any question to our audience? I don't see any. Oh, there's one over here. Okay. Just say briefly who you are and where you come from and ask your question, please.
Okay, here I am. My name is Africa Zanella. I am working with the Center for Sustainability and Gender Economics. I have been recently working with scientists in infrastructure, and I have a bit of a diplomatic background in Australia. My background is Australian. So I'm very interested in this. However, I have an issue with regards to linking, in other words, the link of diplomacy and scientists. I have no issue with the description of diplomacy because we all know what that means. It's a government appointment and it's relating to international, etc., etc. When it comes to scientists, though, and having been involved with the European Union in particular, with H2020 and other scientists of a nature which are really very much involved with innovation and the concept of research, what I find very lacking, and I draw attention to certain words used by a speaker, in particular Lina, I know very well, and she talks about the democratic threat. I heard other speakers talk about the issues of, that is going on in terms of the world. And my impression is that we cannot hide our head in the sand thinking that innovation and research and AI and many of the other things that we're developing, I also happen to be an official observer to the World Bank in climate action, is going to save us, is going to progress. I don't like playing games. I think social science has to come to the fore. We need humanists, not just feminists. We need lots of people to think about what's happening around in the world. And I, so far, haven't yet heard the word social be mentioned anywhere. So once again, I'm sorry, Leah, you've heard me before, but it is something that I must bring forward. Please consider that diplomacy is about bringing people together in some ways, and that when I was in Russia, one of the important issues was scientific.
Keep it short, please,
diplomacy.
because we also
That's
want
it.
others give the floor.
I finished. I think I made my point very clearly, I hope. Thank you very much for your attention and for inviting me here.
I have a question over here, and then I also have some on the screen here. Please, and yeah, Rasmus.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Rasmus Bertelsen. I'm Danish and a professor of Arctic International Relations at the Arctic University of Norway. My question is, I think in Europe and the transatlantic space, we spend a lot of time talking to ourselves and talking to each other. And there's a big world out there. And just last week, Kishore Mahbubani, the Singaporean diplomat and intellectual, wrote in Financial Times, "It's time for the West and the rest to talk to each other as equals." So my question to you is to elaborate in this European framework, how do we talk to the rest? And how do we talk to the rest with whom we may not share points of view, we may not share interests, and they don't share our points of view, they don't find our positions legitimate or credible. So how do we talk to the rest? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You're taking notes. Let's take one more question from the online question, which I see here in front of me. And the one that got most of the votes was, researchers point that science diplomacy is being romanticized, presented as a panacea against big challenges. What is the biggest achievement so far? So think of, in practical terms, what have you actually achieved through science diplomacy? Rather than, always saying, yeah, it's good for building bridges and keeping doors open, but more in practical terms. So perhaps let's have a round here for whoever would like to take the floor on any of the questions you heard so far. Christina, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you very much, Gianmarco. I would like to really take the question on how do we talk with the rest of the world, because this is very important. And I think that we have said in several interventions that with the global approach to research and innovation, we have highlighted those values and principles that underpin international cooperation in research and innovation at European level, such as research ethics, integrity, academic freedom, gender, and science diplomacy as also an element which overreaches these different values and principles. And there, as we mentioned, we have, let's say, at European level, we have endorsed those values and principles through sets of Council conclusion and a report of the European Parliament, for which Lina was very instrumental. And then we have launched what we call a multilateral dialogue with all those third countries with which we have science and technology agreements at European level, which are 20 countries, and with all those countries which are associated to the Horizon Europe program, which are around 16, if I'm not mistaken, and also with the international organizations such as the OECD, UNESCO. And there we are discussing with all of them those values and principles. And just to be very concise and specific, we have managed to discuss academic freedom, gathering the US and China together at the same table. And that is exactly because, first of all, we do not want to impose our views, but we don't want to think that our views are the center of the world. We want to go outside and to discuss with the rest of the world. There will be an important event, which is this ministerial meeting on values and principles, which is will take place on the 16th of February next year, which should gather all those ministers together to take stock of where we stand and to try to develop a common understanding on those values and principles, indeed, at multilateral level. I stop here. I refrain I pass the floor to the others for the other questions.
Any other comments to the question we heard?
Yeah, may I take the one on social part and impact? And well, I completely agree. Science could be good, could help us to answer these global challenges, or not, or to answer in a way that it is only benefiting a few and not the majority, or not everybody. So it is always a political issue as well. And as a social scientist, obviously, I agree with you on that, also on economics, as you well know. For that, probably cooperation also with the rest, it is important because there are many views. But also, I think transparency, it is very important. Also appealing as scientists, because we really need to, each one of us or each person now doing, I'm not doing now science in the last 5 years, but before, yes. So we really need to ask ourselves why we are doing that research, which impact will have, and how many inequalities or not, who will benefit or not, and who is financing. This is very important to be open about, to know and to say who is financing. And another issue I think that's important, it is to give also the opportunities for everybody to participate in science, and for that, obviously, to allow and to give opportunity to poor countries to have good scientists to participate in that process. It is very important also to have a better science, not in a brain drain way, but in that way, and obviously with more diversity and more women also on it, because as I said many times, I mean, talents are equally spread, but opportunities are not. So with science diplomacy, we should also improve these opportunities and to have others also to participate. And when I say others, I don't I don't include women because we are half of the population. So we are not others. We are even more than half of the population. But we really need to improve our participation.
Okay, anybody who wants to take the romanticizing science diplomacy question? Marek, perhaps?
Let me allude to the first question from the audience, and it also relates to romantic part, excuse me, of science diplomacy. Certainly, science diplomacy is a very broad term, and this is interdisciplinary. So definitely, we need to bring together both, let's say, social sciences, humanities, and natural scientists. Without that, this project won't be possible. And of course, this is yet another problem we face, that the true collaboration between different areas of scientific undertaking, particularly humanities and natural sciences, is not the best part of our scientific world. So without this communication, we won't be successful. And this must be a part of, let's say, science diplomacy agenda, to bring together these all possible parts of scientific community and unite them in the effort to make science diplomacy more visible. And with that, I'm kind of preempting your final question, what would be my wish with regard to science diplomacy. This is bringing together scientists to be more voiceful towards policy making. And of course, from the other side, this would be well received by the politicians, as long as we scientists are honest brokers and bring, let's say, very, very effective advice on how to proceed with the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for expressing your wish. And as we need to conclude the panel now, perhaps also to the others the question, what would be your wish if you would have just one sentence, one idea when it comes to European Framework for Science?
Again, it's a trick question, right? One wish. That is almost, to me, impossible, but I will focus on one sentence, and then I will just, mention briefly 4 sides of the question. I think we have to recognize the profound impact that scientific advancements have on our global society. That goes with the question also from the floor. We have to emphasize the critical importance of actively including citizens and civil society in the science policy. And therefore, then it becomes a diplomacy process, right? So we're living in an era where scientific and technological developments are actually the world's future. We have to foster dialogues, as we said before, between policymakers, scientists, and general public. Actually, what I think is that engaging citizens in science diplomacy not only will promote transparency and inclusivity, will also ensure that the benefit of the scientific advances actually goes to the people. I think by involving citizens in this area, we harness also something that we will miss if we don't do so, which is harness collective wisdom from society. I think we have to create a more democratic and responsive framework for addressing actually the global challenge that we have.
Thank you. Any other issues on the Christmas wish list to science diplomacy? No? Okay. Good. Then let's come to the closing of this panel, because it's 6:15. Actually, I see here just on a second spot on my screen a question from the audience, the online audience. How will EU science diplomacy be different from the AAAS approach? So my answer to it would be just listen to the next 2 days of discussions, and then we will hopefully have gained some wisdom. Thank you very much for joining this panel. First of all, to our speakers, please give them a round of applause. And thank you all for listening. And I think Leire will give us a few technical remarks on what happens next. If you just hold 1 minute so that you know where to go afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the speakers and the moderator for this great conversation. Thank you. So we will go now for a short break of 15 minutes. But before you leave, I want to let you know that after this break, we will have 2 parallel sessions, one here and one in the second floor. So the session on science diplomacy in the relations between the European Union and the Mediterranean will take place here, and there is no constraints, no problem of capacity. But the one for the Latin American session, there is some capacity constraints. So if you want to get a seat, we recommend to go early. So please don't forget to return your translation headsets, and see you in 15 minutes. Thank you. Hello? Yes. Hello, welcome back. If you could please take a seat, we are about to begin. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. So welcome back. So the upcoming panel will address science diplomacy in the relations between the European Union and the Mediterranean. Please welcome the moderator of this panel, Zehra Sayers, Emeritus Faculty Member at Sabanci University and former Chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Sesame Synchrotron. Please, Zehra, thank you.
Well, please, I will sit here, please. We have our panel here. We have a distinguished set of guests in our panel today on the EU relations in the Mediterranean. I think there's quite a bit to say, but I have to briefly introduce our panelists. I would like to. I think my voice is probably strong enough so that everybody hears me. We have His Excellency Nasser Kamal. You have heard him before, and he has been in the Egyptian diplomatic service for many years in the UK and in France. And I think you were involved at the earlier stages of establishment of the Union for the Mediterranean, and then now you're working as the Secretary General for the Union for the Mediterranean. And I'm sure we're going to benefit from his experiences. We have Cristina Russo. You have heard also her being introduced earlier on, and she is one of the brains behind the Horizon programs and also the international programs of the EU. And we have here Slim Kabul, and he has been, he's the rector of Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie, and he has also been a minister for higher education in Tunisia, and I'm sure again, and he's an entrepreneur at the same time, and it will be important for him to share his experiences with us. And then we have Gavlik, Bernd Gavlik, and he is from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission in Italy, which is, I think, one of the biggest installations outside Brussels and Luxembourg. And he has been involved in a lot of projects concerning water research and detection of pollutants in water. And he also was quite active during the COVID time, I think, trying to do epidemiological research on wastewater. And we have Octavi Quintana, and we've heard several times about the PIMA project. Now I think he should tell us a bit more about the PIMA project and also share his experiences. You've been involved in a lot of humanitarian work also across the world, and so in many international projects, and we will benefit from your experiences. But we will start our panel with Giuseppe, who is project coordinator in the Union for the Mediterranean, and he's going to tell us about the recent conference they have had in Barcelona at the beginning of October, where all the members of the Union for the Mediterranean were brought together and talked about science diplomacy. So please, Giuseppe.
Thank you. I think there should be a few slides. Perfect. So this is a very brief report and the outcomes of the very first Euro-Mediterranean Conference on Science Diplomacy. This was a joint endeavor organized by the Union for the Mediterranean in cooperation with the European Commission. Of course, as all the moments of dialogue, they are not born in a vacuum, but they are following up many years of cooperation and activities on science diplomacy, which have involved the main stakeholders in the region, including FECIT, but also the Muni University, and so on. This conference was a bit of an experiment in the Union for the Mediterranean framework, and I dare to say was a highly successful one. We had 75 scholars, diplomats, and practitioners that came from 3 continents which joined the Union for the Mediterranean as a region, and we had more than 22 countries, I believe, that joined. So there were 2 overarching questions that the participants tried to answer. The first one was how we could leverage science diplomacy for achieving jointly multilateral regional goals in the Euro-Mediterranean region. And the second question was which kind of partnership could be used for multiplying the efforts and the impact, and especially which kind of future activities can we envisage to go together. Here, extremely in synthesis, in the next 2 slides, I'm going to present group the 6 main points that the participants have decided could be painted as the outcomes of this conference. The first one was recognizing that indeed science endeavors and technology can serve to tackle overarching challenges. This is common to all the world, but when it comes to the Mediterranean region, they identify some specific topics, including water scarcity, sustainable energy supplies, and most importantly, food security. They recognize that science diplomacy can be used to foster can be fostered by access to research infrastructures, which in the region is not always to achieve, to have more training and education as a way of building a community of practice in science diplomacy in the Mediterranean, and to increase especially communication, so channels and exchange between scientists, diplomats, and policymakers. One of the fields where the Union for the Mediterranean is one of the advantages. They recognize, of course, all past efforts for science diplomacy, including the Mediterranean Initiative in Horizon Europe, but of course, most notably PRIMA, and the many scientific initiatives such as the CIAM MedForum for PhDs. They called, of course, international organizations, member states, networks, groups of experts, to increase their impact and footprint on science diplomacy. They recognize the work done so far by the Union for the Mediterranean on science diplomacy, and most notably, they gave few pointers for future activities in the future, giving more support to scholars and practitioners in being aware about these tools and how to interact with each other, recognizing the importance of meeting in Euro-Mediterranean format, so between the 3 continents and countries pertaining to this bi-region, and perhaps expressing a wish to reconvene in 2 years, and finally to explore among the many possibilities the possibility of a Mediterranean science diplomacy hub. Here I will close with this nice picture of the gathering where you can see all the faces of the Mediterranean, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, I think now we will start with His Excellency Nasser Kamal. I had a couple of questions in mind, and one of them was give us a little bit more information about the tools of science diplomacy that are used in Union for the Mediterranean, and what benefits. Actually, in the previous session, there was the question about the concrete examples of science diplomacy. So maybe we can consider Union for the Mediterranean as one of the concrete examples of science diplomacy. So could you please elaborate on that a bit?
I'll do my best. Thank you very much for having me. And I think Giuseppe started answering the question because having taken the initiative in cooperation, of course, with our major partner, which is the European Commission, in organizing this conference on science diplomacy, showcase how important is the subject as far as regional cooperation in the Euro-Mediterranean region is concerned. We are a region that is facing multidimensional challenges. And I'm not talking here geopolitics, but also in addition to the geopolitics, we have the climate change challenge. We are the most impacted region by this phenomenon, warming 20% faster than the rest of the world. We have environmental challenge in terms of the impact of climate change on the rising sea level, on our agricultural sector, especially on the coastal areas. So we do have extremely important issue when it comes to our food supply, energy, and I would dare even say the livability of some of our country with this climate change challenge. So if we add to that, we are a region comprised of countries belonging to different at the different socio-economic level of development, different culture, we have to admit, global north and global south. I think science diplomacy is imperative to deal with the challenge, and because it is a neutral ground on which we can work together, try to tackle those shared challenges, and find collectively certain solution. By, of course, introducing the most important promise of science diplomacy, because why we're talking science and we're using diplomacy, because we need to bring the science policy interface, bringing the science to the policymakers as much as we can. So we can push our decision maker to implement real solution based on science and real, as a regional organization, real cooperation between our member states to work together on facing those challenges. Don't want to go into history, but even the Barcelona Declaration, which is have created this framework of cooperation, have stated very clearly, and I'm quoting, science and technology have a significant influence on socio-economic development of the Euro-Mediterranean region. So you're asking me about examples. I've given you an introduction, but you need examples. Many, I have to say. Starting with very simple ones, such as training diplomats and journalists, for example, on scientific issue, so they can bring those issues to the public opinion on one hand, or to the decision maker on another hand. So we train journalists on climate, very extensive training on what are the challenges of climate change. We train diplomat on one of the challenge in our region, which is the lack of regional economic integration. I don't know who posed the question about social science, so I do agree with her that when we talk science and it's all in all its dimension, including, of course, economics and all social sciences. This is a simple example. Another, in my view, important example of how we brought science to the decision maker attention was 3 reports that we helped create. The first one was on the impact of climate change, the first ever report on the impact of climate change on a specific region, because the UN is working globally, but we did this while supporting the MEDEC group of scientists. We're talking about 800 scientists who have worked for 3 years studying the impact of climate change on the Euro-Mediterranean region. And as I mentioned in the beginning, their findings were quite alarming in terms of not only of warming 20% faster, but the rising sea level in the Mediterranean, its impact on the agri-food sector, and on the water in a region that is already water poor and could lose 20% of its water resource in the next 20 to 30 years. So science here is extremely important and needed. Another important report, scientific report, was the report we did with the OECD on the state of play of regional economic integration. And we did not do this report based on published work. We went and collected the raw data from our member states on the state of play of regional integration in terms of trade, in terms of connectivity, in terms of mobility, and even in terms of research and innovation. Another also is our work on women empowerment. So when we work on this very important subject of women empowerment, we base our work on science in a sense that we have helped our member state collect data on the 4 or 5 indicators that we are using to do our, what I call a peer review mechanism in terms of women role in the economic field, women political empowerment, violence against women, and also women in conflict, which are, and they tend to be the first victim in a situation of conflict, and Gaza is a prime example of that. So those are very, very few examples of how science is part and parcel of what we do and part of our DNA. I don't want to talk more than this. I have so many other examples. But before I end my intervention, I would have to say if it wasn't for our cooperation with our ecosystem, and first and foremost with JTRG, Cristina Russo will give you many examples of what they're doing to support the UFM, but also to support research and innovation in the Euro-Mediterranean region. Octavio will talk about one of the most successful regional program on scientific research that is working on diet, on food system, and so many other things. All those are examples that working together with the EU, with the Commission, or with regional initiatives that are also supported by the Commission, are yielding results. Scientists in our region, they know each other, they talk to each other, they have projects together, and this will help bring our region closer together and deal with the main challenge I mentioned in the beginning of my intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think this brings us quite nicely to our question to Cristina Russo. How does Mediterranean play in the new framework that is being developed, and how does it fit into the whole picture?
I think that, as Ambassador Kamel said, I mean, the Mediterranean is facing enormous challenges. I mean, I would like to highlight the richness of the Mediterranean basin, the complexity and the diversity. And with that, I mean, it's really the ideal place where we could and should develop science diplomacy. Let me say that in terms of international cooperation in research and innovation and science diplomacy, the Mediterranean has always had a very, very important place. Since already 1995, in the European Commission, after the Barcelona Declaration, we set up a specific committee on research and innovation cooperation with the Mediterranean area in order to really tackle those challenges amongst the states of the two shores of the Mediterranean. And we in the European Commission were leading this committee together with the Jordan co-presidency of the UFM. Let me say also how important has been the role of Ambassador Kamel and all the colleagues from the UFM in making a strategic decision according to which we have included this research and innovation dialogue that we were carrying out in the European Commission within the umbrella of the UFM in order to really enhance synergies and maximize impact. I come back to the maximizing impact that I mentioned earlier on. And there we have done some very beautiful things and very impactful. Giuseppe mentioned the result of this science diplomacy conference in the Mediterranean, which was indeed co-organized by the European Union and the UFM. But let me also say that one pillar of our cooperation, of our scientific cooperation in the Mediterranean, has been the ministerial conference of research and innovation ministers of the UFM, including, of course, the EU, that the EU commissioner that took place in 2022. And within this context, and I might come back later on that, we have endorsed at political level those roadmaps for cooperation which set the strategic priorities for moving forward in research and innovation, and then a series of concrete actions. And that is something that we have done in the Mediterranean region, and we have not done for many other regions because of the specificity of the Mediterranean. Now, several times we have mentioned PRIMA, and that will be explained in more details afterwards in terms of functioning. But let me highlight that in 1994, the European Commission, based on a proposal for some member states on the basis of Article 185 of the EU Treaty, has put forward a proposal in order to set up PRIMA, which is a unique endeavor that we did, because with that we established, if you want, a specific research program within the overall research program, which is focused on the Mediterranean. And this is the only region in the world where we did that. And we did that because of the importance of research and innovation for the Mediterranean region. Let me say also that PRIMA is not only an example of science diplomacy for the work that it does, which is indeed very important, and that's why also we now have proposed the continuation of PRIMA for 3 more years. And I would like to thank again the wonderful cooperation that we had with the Spanish presidency of the Council, which allowed to reach a decision in very speedy timing. But in order for PRIMA to function, we need to have the southern Mediterranean countries, which are at the same level participants of the PRIMA initiative, same level of the European Union member states. There, it has been necessary to develop some specific international agreements with 5 southern Mediterranean countries, which were not associated to the Horizon program. There were 2 which were associated, Tunisia and Israel, for which we didn't have to have any specific agreement, whereas we had to negotiate and to sign an agreement with Algeria, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, and Morocco. I had the honor and pleasure to undertake those international negotiations in the PRIMA 1 round, and I'm doing it now also for the prolongation of PRIMA. And I would say that there, the only reason why we have been really able to have those agreements, I mean, can you imagine with Lebanon, there was 11 years that there was not a fully fledged international agreement between the EU and Lebanon. With Morocco, I don't want even to mention the issues that exist at the time and still exist about the territoriality. and also with the other countries of the South Med was not easy. And in fact, what I want to highlight here is that this drive, this belief that through scientific cooperation we can achieve a lot, and that science diplomacy allows also to overcome the political hurdles, where in fact the reasons why we managed, in spite of those political hurdles, in spite of some structural issues, to conclude those agreements which allowed the launching of the PRIMA 1, and hopefully we can move also forward for this second phase. So I think that that shows really not only the unicity of the Mediterranean region that we know, but also the unicity of the role that research and innovation plays in this region, and the importance that at European Union level we place on the role that research and innovation has in the region. We place the importance, and we do undertake those actions that really allow it to make it happen.
I think it is important to realize the catalyzing effect of research and innovation in relations among the countries, because it doesn't matter how you start, but then you see how it can get broader and other countries will be involved, and also reciprocity happens along the way as the project develops. So I will now move to you, if I may, and ask you to give us a bit more information about PRIMA, and also tell us when these projects stop being or not stop, but move from being multilateral to research projects to actually being science diplomacy projects, because at the beginning you support projects on their scientific value, and this I think is very important. But then how does it sort of slowly move towards science diplomacy? This is a question I have in mind.
Thank you very much. First of all, almost everything has been said about PRIMA. Let me just remind you that it is an initiative of 19 countries around the Mediterranean, 11 European, 8 non-European, and with the strong support of the European Union. So all countries contribute, all participating states contribute financially, and this is essential. There is a strong support from the European Union through Horizon Europe, well, Horizon 2020, now Horizon Europe these days. This is dealing, we all have common challenges around the Mediterranean, of which climate change is very important. It hits a 20% higher or more speed than the average of the world. Is the second most affected region in the world after the Arctic. So it's the Mediterranean, and specifically on water, stress, agriculture, and food, and the connections between them, all these sectors. Now, when going to the second part of your question, how these moves, I mean, research and innovation projects moving to science diplomacy. We have a requirement in PRIMA, which is that all projects need to have partners from Europe and non-Europeans, and this leads us to specific issues such as conflicts which, let's say, not only in the best political terms, such as Morocco and Algeria, such as Greece and Turkey, such as Israel with a number of countries, and I will not deal into it, but you all have in mind what I'm referring to. These countries have scientific teams working in the same projects, and this is essential. You cannot imagine, after the last crisis that we have in mind, the tensions that this created and or still creates, and how things have been preserved so far. So this is a very important part of science diplomacy. It's not that we cover all science diplomacy. We cover just a specific issue on science diplomacy, that is that people from different countries with conflicts, they still work together, because in the end, science is a rational language that everybody, all scientists understand. This goes away from emotions, which is very often what moves politics. We are in the rational language. We are in the universal way of approaching problems. We know that cooperation is essential in science. If something that scientists very well understand is that cooperation adds up to the impact of science, and all this builds trust. And trust is what we'll like to have among at least the scientific communities of these countries. So this is what, for us, the basis of the way we work is trust. Now, how do you achieve this with so different countries? Well, it is essential that all countries own the program. And the way to own the program is not helping from Europe, is not a cooperation or development program, is that all countries own the program, and to own the program, they need to contribute financially. Otherwise, it is those who have the money who take the decisions, and the others benefit or not from these decisions. But it is essential. There is something also very important that was mentioned by Christina, the fact that we all share a strategic research and innovation agenda. So all the countries share a strategic research and innovation agenda, which means that all we understand which are our priorities for the challenges that we have in the Mediterranean. And I'll stop here because I don't want to monopolize.
No, I definitely see the point of trust and also owning. This was also very important for Sesame. When Sesame was being built, it was important that the partner countries owned it, and also they learned somehow to trust each other, at least at some points in the project, maybe not all along the line. So now this brings me to my questions to Slim. You are, as the rector of the Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie, you are seeing a lot of interactions among different countries all around the world, and also maybe sometimes having to mediate among them as well. So could you please share with us some of your experiences from that you get in this process, and also which could serve as examples for other structures?
Thank you. I'm happy to participate for both reasons, to represent AUF, Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie, in this beautiful country for this events on scientific diplomacy, but also as a former Minister of Higher Education and Research in a South Mediterranean country. I have worked a lot on the relationship between South Mediterranean and Europe, so it's a very important subject for me. Maybe some words about IUF, because I don't know if people know about our organization, established in 1961. It's our main goal is the development of nations through knowledge and science. More specifically, IUF promotes the role of science and the role of the university in the development, with, of course, as a Francophonie agency, recognized by the heads of states and government of the Francophonie world. IUF focused more on French-speaking scientific community, but not only. If IUF is considered now the first university network in the world, it's because we have since 1990 more than 1,000 university and research centers in our network. We are operating over 120 countries, so much larger than only the speaking French countries. We are supporting education and public politics, academic institution, research, and student in many ways, like network development to foster collaboration and partnership, enhancing the capacity of academic institution, facilitate student employability and entrepreneurship, facilitating academic exchange, applied research for development in particular, and so on. Maybe 2 words about our presence in the 2 regions of this subject of this panel in Europe and Mediterranean area. We have in Occidental Europe 200 universities members in IUF, managed by our direction, regional direction in Brussels, Belgium. In Central and European Europe, we have 150 universities. Managed by our region direction in Bucharest, in Romania. In North Africa, 130 members, managed by our regional direction in Rabat, Morocco. And finally, in the Middle East, 90 members, managed by our regional direction too in Beirut, Lebanon. So if you consider only who's are directly on the Mediterranean area, we have in total more than 350 universities and research centers in our Mediterranean work. So, like Mr. Quintana said about PRIMA, we succeed to create relations and collaboration between university and scientific in some countries who are not in very good relations. So it's with all these activities and our network, you understand, it was natural that IUF is very interesting on science and diplomacy and play a significant role in this field, especially within French-speaking academic community, of course, but like I said, not only. Our main results, and we are proud about that, it's the production of a manifesto for Francophone diplomacy scientific, for scientific diplomacy, the declaration was made on the Conference of Ministers of Higher Education and Research. It's an annual meeting organized by IUF. It was in 1992 in Cairo. The manifesto is already signed by 42 governments. It becomes a reference document for the scientific collaboration inside out our network. So this is the framework of our work in IUF about developing science and diplomacy, but maybe later I will give you some elements from the content of this manifesto. It's a very important document.
Okay, thank you very much. So I come now to Ben. You have been quite instrumental in trying to bring science to people in different ways. So can you please tell us a bit about your work in this area?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Before I come to my work, I think it is important that you learn from the audience a little bit about my person and who I am, because it is intrinsic to my DNA that brought me to that. So I'm German by nationality, but I'm Silesian, which means I'm one of these children that lost the culture as a consequence of World War II, and it took me a long way, being adult, to realize that. I was trained in France, and I'm married to an Italian. I'm living now in Italy. So if people ask me, what are you? I said, I'm a European with a German passport. But if you ask me if I'm Polish, if I'm German, or what else, I can't really answer it. with the exception for the football games there. There we go. Now, a little bit the same when it comes to the question, are you a scientist? Actually, I'm an engineer, but I have a PhD in chemistry. So yes, I'm a scientist, but I'm also very much interested in explaining and sharing what I have. And this has been a leitmotif for me. And it is logical in a sense that this brought me to work with water. Why water? Water is a connector between people. Water is essential for all of us. And when it comes to the Mediterranean, where I happen to live now for 3 decades, it is essential. It is actually part of the very DNA of the Mediterranean. So what I do, I started first in gaining some knowledge about water quality. You mentioned the word pollution. I actually then realized, well, pollution is one side of the medal. There's another aspect to it, which is that you can actually make out of that pollution a solution. But then I came to a moment where I realized that, well, hang on, I have all these beautiful scientific ideas, and we have great engineering ideas, but the people don't use that. Why is that so? So, you know, when it comes to innovation, at a certain moment, you have this permanent frustration that people are not choosing the best solution, but they're choosing what they think is the most convenient solution. Right? And everybody who's an entrepreneur, he knows that, or she knows that. Entrepreneurship is not about selling the people what they need, but what they want. That's how you make money. That's very easy, actually, if you think about it. So I started getting interested in what is it that makes me accept change when it comes to innovation, when it comes in particular to sustainability issue. And I got into the theory of innovation uptake. In innovation uptake, you have a theory which is the so-called quadruple helix. The quadruple helix tells you, well, when you want innovation uptake to happen, you have to have an interaction between the public, the private sector, research and academia, inventing the thing, and the citizen. Very easy. And these four come together, innovation may be uptaken. I said, okay, that's nice, but why is this not working for when it comes to solutions like water reuse, desalination, or any sort of other technology? Why is that not happening? And then I understand that, well, I cannot come from an office in Brussels and go to a Spanish farmer in Seville and tell him you have to stop to grow tomatoes because first, my models are telling you are completely off the scale. Secondly, I can sell you some Dutch technology which would work. And thirdly, we will have some bank and financing mechanisms going to finance it. That will not be accepted. And why is that so? Because I missed the fifth element, the culture. So that's how I came to science diplomacy. And this is what I try to bring into my work. The work of a joint research center, in a sense, is a beautiful idea. And the JRC is one of these beautiful constructs after World War II, which was invented. But a true joint research center can only work as a network of local research centers that are interconnected. So in a sense, we are missing still this link. So DG Research, Christina is doing a marvelous job, and Prima is a fantastic program in funding research, but we are not very good in harvesting what's coming out of the research. It drops in a grave called PDF all too often. And so I made it kind of my mission to, well, go out and look what is there. Harvest it, translate it in different language. I cannot speak English to somebody living in Tunisia, can I? A person will not understand me. I cannot even speak English to somebody in Spain. A person will not understand me. So language, culture, the way to communicate, these are the things we have to train ourselves as scientists, and we have to use to translate the language. This is a little bit what we did. In this work, what is very important for us was the work actually with artists. Now, with this, I come to the conclusion, why art? Because art is the only thing when it comes to disagreement where we tolerate to disagree. It's the only thing. You may like Picasso, you may prefer Renoir, but it's perfectly fine. We're good with this. So if I combine art and if I combine culture with science, I have actually a tool that can I adopt to local innovation uptake. That's a little bit what I did.
Thank you. So I think now I'm going to go around once more and ask you about maybe a kind of wish list and also a kind of if I came to you with a project in science diplomacy, what would I need to show to convince you that this is going to work, that this has a meaning? What would make my project more meaningful? We've been talking about it being multilateral. We've been talking about it reaching people. We've been talking about it being maybe down to earth. But what are the important factors which will make, well, first of all, also, I think the science should be good. That goes without saying. I don't have to say much about that because science comes first. And whether it's social sciences or natural sciences, I would say both have equal weight. But what would convince you? What would be sort of the thing that will attract your attention as, well, you know, I think this will make a good project for science diplomacy?
So I think that certainly what would be attractive is to see whom are the actors of this project, of this initiative, because I wouldn't now say that, for example, the projects that we do finance under the research and innovation programs, we do not intervene in terms of evaluation, so it's based on a peer review, based on scientific excellence. So, but I'm speaking more generally on an initiative on science diplomacy, what would it make attractive? And certainly it's the fact of connecting people that wouldn't talk amongst themselves if they were not in this initiative. And that is, for me, the key on science diplomacy. The fact that through this initiative, and you work in CESAM, you know very well what I'm talking about. I mean, CESAM, which you are chief scientific advisor, is the most wonderful example of science diplomacy, where you have been able to attract scientists from countries which would not have talked if they were not in the CESAM project. So that is, for me, the key element, that it's not only a beautiful scientific project, but that brings together, creates bridges between scientists. And then there was a question that we have mentioned already several times, the common ownership, that this is not yet another initiative, that it's something that is really felt as an initiative that could make a difference, certainly from a scientific point of view, but also from a point of view of creating and developing a connection between the different parts of this initiative that would not naturally get together if there was not this scientific challenge that they would like to tackle together.
Thank you. Should we move on to you? What would make a project sort of attract your attention in a project?
Of course, like a policy-making decision, I would have national priority to respect and cater to acquis. This is the rules, basic rules. But the most important thing for me in a science diplomacy project is the vision presented for international cooperation. I mentioned 3 conditions, for example, or main condition for me. It's first of all, it have to be a win-win project. This is very important that all parties find a good things on the project. Is it a project where each part promote its comparative advantages? That's very important too, because we haven't the same specialty, the same advantages. The third one, the project, if the project provide concrete solution or not. That's very important because science diplomacy, it's not just a diplomacy for relationship and for some discussion, and it will be a concrete project too. This is very important, especially for international cooperation. my advocacy for a more intensive and institutional cooperation between policymakers and scientists, I can resume it in three concepts very quickly. First of all, the complexity. Considering the growing complexity of the world challenge, decision makers increasing needs to rely on the expert advice of scientists. We see it in pandemic, but climate, energy, education, unemployment, violence in society now, migration, cybersecurity, and so on. These challenges are today more and more characteristic by global, multilateral, and cross-border dynamics. The second argument is mutual development. Sustainable and inclusive development can only be reached if it's designed globally. This international convergence of societal concern must promote win-win and non-ideological approaches at the local, national, regional, and international level. It's convergence that benefit both scientists with diversity of their contribution and public policies with diversity of their orientation. It's a convergence that benefit both scientists, countries of the South, of which further development requires greater use of science, technology, and innovation, and countries of the North, of which progress is threatened by growing complexity, immigration, and aggravation inequalities. The third and last argument is multilingualism. Like me, I'm trying to speak in English. I have a basic English, but I'm trying to speak in English for an important subject. I know that in Europe, we are very sensitive to the question of multilingualism. But in science diplomacy, beyond political aspect, beyond aspect of cultural identity and respect for diversity, the monolingualism in science is an impoverishment, a kind of underdevelopment of intellectual thought. Using only one language in knowledge is like having a single vision of the world, which is unacceptable, and above all, does not correspond to reality. And it's even less acceptable when it comes to scientific research. It's therefore more a question of value and vision than a purely linguistic question, especially since today, thanks to generative AI, the question of translation will be completely transformed. By integrating the Francophony, for my cases, the Francophony word in multilingual framework, it was a changing paradigm when I arrived to IUF, and promoting its richness alongside other languages, that's important, we can promote a more inclusive and diverse scientific landscape that make it possible to better respond to the two first challenges, I mean complexity and mutual development. Of course, this way of thinking is obviously effective for all international languages, which can provide added value to knowledge. So that's my position in this fields. Thank you.
Yes, I do think that multi-language, having skills of multi-language is very important. And I was in fact recently thinking, after Brexit, we still, in a lot of pages of the European Union, I see everything in English, but at the moment we are sort of more or less obliged to it, and we use it as a common language. So it is important to be able to make some switches somewhere along the way to incorporate other languages which are widely used around the world, I think. And what about you, Bent? What would you say about a project that you would support?
Well, first of all, I had more time to think about it, so I have an advantage. Secondly, I'm coming from an organization which is not giving money, and that makes it easier for me to answer that. But the first advice I give everybody, never ask for money. Never. Always ask, how can I be of use? So for me, a good project must have, a good science diplomacy project must have 3 criteria. The first one, it must have the feature of diversity. I don't want to present myself as a feminist, but I do believe that science diplomacy profits from gender balance. And I'm saying this out of experience, out of the experience in the work I did in the Mediterranean, but also out of the work I'm doing right now in Africa on wastewater epidemiology. The reason is not necessarily the fact that you bring in women and they have a different point of view. I mean, why would you be so stupid to leave out 50% of the human intelligence out of the equation? That's it. It has nothing to do with feminism. Just don't be so stupid. If you have a problem to solve, use 100% of the brain power, and you need to do this in a diverse way. Secondly, if a science diplomacy project deserves to be sustained, it needs to have 2 aspects scientists hate. The first one is linked to politics. Scientists hate that. They don't like to speak with politicians because politicians, they have a different way of mindset, they have a different way of acting, they have a different agenda than scientists understand. And there's one element which is worse for scientists than politicians, and that's the citizen. I've seen too many projects that claim to be citizen science, citizen approach, citizen-based, where they never, ever spoke to the citizen on the ground. So these 2 things have to come together. And last but not least, a very important deal is, since we are talking about diplomacy, this underlies that there is a conflict. Well, where is the deal if you are buying in? If you approach a conflict, there needs to be, at the end of the day, a deal. And all too often, we don't answer that question. So we make maybe a project and we have nice conferences and we come together, but when the funds are over, the problem is still there. So this aspect of the deal, which does not necessarily mean it's a deal in terms of money, this is the 3rd element that needs to be answered in a good science diplomacy project. Thank you.
So now we come to you. And,
Yes, well, almost everything has been said. Let me just point out 4 very quick points. First of all, that the project addresses common challenges to all the participating states. That second, that they share a strategy, and it is through a common strategic research and innovation agenda. That the project contributes to ease the relationships, or at least alleviates or allows the participation of countries that have conflicts at other levels. And fourth, that in a way or in another, but at least scientifically, but if it's possible in other ways, integrates countries. I mean, we in the north, in Europe, have learned the benefits of integration, and the south of the Mediterranean is one of the less integrated regions in the world. Only 6% of the trade is among them. So that means that potentially they could enormously benefit from an integration that would certainly overcome a research innovation. I'd like to finish saying that talent as crooks are spread homogeneously in all the societies. We need to create the opportunities, the environment for this talent, especially in the South, to emerge. And this is creating programs which allow this talent to emerge. This is an essential goal of any program of the sort, because the talent exists and is the only is the only resource that is unlimited. All the others are limited. The only one that is unlimited is human creativity. And we need to bet on this resource that is unlimited. The South has some advantages. The average population is much younger than in the North, and this means that they are digital natives many more than in the North. And this gives a comparative advantage as it were. So for all these reasons, I think that there are many, I mean, the potential is there and we need to exploit much more. One piece of evidence is that the success rate in PRIMA is very low, which means that there are many more applications that we can fund. Many would be worth funding, but we are at the level of 4.5% of funding, which is pretty low, but this means that there is a huge hungry for this research and innovation. Thanks.
I just want to ask one thing about PRIMA. Are there any efforts to increase the membership of PRIMA? Maybe maybe we can talk about that later, but I don't know. I mean, this would be one way of being able to support more projects.
No.
And also, no?
No. I mean, what could bring more opportunities is to have much more money, but this is something that it's a little bit more tricky.
Okay.
We have, by the way, we have Bulgaria who has just recently joined, which is a very good news as well for the next extension of these 3 years.
I think, well, I thank you all very much for this lively discussion. Now we can open these talks to your discussion as well. We can accept questions from the floor, and also there are some questions I see. Can you move this a little bit towards me? I can read it better. But let's first of all take the questions from the floor. I can see 1, 2, 3. At the back there, 1. There. You're number 3. And there was another one too here, yeah. Okay.
Hello, my name is Nadine Knapp. I'm a postdoctoral scholar and lecturer in psychology at Tel Aviv University, and also the chair of the Peace Psychology Association. Thank you so much for giving the insight. I have basically 2 short questions that go in the same area. So I have the impression when we talk about science diplomacy, it's very abstract, and there comes a lot of issues. So first of all, I hear a lot about, for example, there are a lot of very big topics, for example, climate change. And when we talk about climate change, we talk about climate change impact and how we can communicate the impact. But actually research is showing that the belief in climate change is not necessarily that people don't believe in it. The issue is that there is a lack of action towards climate change mitigation. And maybe my question goes to Bernd Gavlik a little bit, because he inspired me with saying he wants to find a solution for behavior change. And you mentioned that one of the solutions for you is, first of all, science communication, but also to connect it with areas that people can understand and can discuss, so with art. So maybe you can share quickly a project that you led, and also maybe how you evaluated it, because I think science and diplomacy don't stop by implementing the projects, but also by evaluating actually the impact of the projects. And the other question goes a little bit in the direction of when we talk about science diplomacy, we have this idealistic perspective that, okay, there's science and they produce insights, and then it goes into diplomacy and in policy, and then it comes back. But this, of course, is a very idealistic viewpoint. Most often it could be that actually research or science is not necessarily in the interest of policy or also of certain actors in the diplomatic sphere. So maybe you can share some experiences you have, how you tackled this challenge of navigating different perspectives. And I think Ms. Russo, she said a little bit about that, so maybe you can go into detail about a specific experience about that. And the light is telling me maybe to stop talking. So I give back.
I'll go for the first one, climate change. the region has much more experience in adaptation to climate change than many other parts of the world. Climate change is going north, and Europe has a lot to learn from adaptation strategies from the south. And this is typically science diplomacy. So it brings solutions which work in the south that eventually would work in the north. So I'll be very, mitigation is much more difficult. Those countries are not big emitters, and when we look at mitigation measures, we need to look much more to the north. But adaptations, they are much better than Europe by far and large.
If I jump on this, since you were asking for a specific question, we concluded with the Union for the Mediterranean and the Global Water Partnership in the Mediterranean this assessment of the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus in the Mediterranean. And it started by doing first an analysis when things went downwards in the Mediterranean. And that was clearly when we started to impose on the Mediterranean region a form of agriculture for which it was not designed for which it was, for whatever reason, also their man-made change, not suitable. Now, thanks to the work which we conducted then with UFM and also many PRIMA projects, we were able to compile a series of 45 case studies in which we actually could show what Octavio just said, that there are many solutions which are there, but which are not known, or which have been forgotten, or which are not mainstream. So for instance, when it comes to certain types of crops, which are not prone for the European market, but if you can go back to it, or you can do actually a lot. There's a lot of irrigation technology, actually. What we import right now from the Mediterranean, from the non-European part to Europe, is how you irrigate. It's a technology which is there. I mean, 3,000 years ago, you had water clocks in Egypt. It's unbelievable, but actually you have to go back to this. You have the engineering technology of groundwater or management, which is now brought to us from other parts. In Tunisia is, for instance, one of the forerunner countries in Africa on water reuse technology. Not water reuse technology, we think we're going to do it in Germany, because that is far too technology intensive, but low-tech. Or we had a brief talk about the engineering aspects you have in Turkey available. So we do have this compendium which was brought together. We are sharing this, and around this we have built a community of practice which also PRIMA is bringing forward around the water, energy, food and ecosystem nexus.
So I guess this is a kind of answer for bringing it to the people, right? That's what you were talking about. And then I think there was one that was addressed to Christina. It will come.
I wanted to speak about the concrete actions because I think you said that we do speak about the importance of climate change, but then what do we do concretely? And we have given several examples, but for example, when I mentioned earlier on that we had the ministerial meeting amongst the UFM Research and Innovation Ministers, and we adopted the ministers adopted a declaration with 3 concrete roadmaps on climate change, health, and renewable energy. And those roadmaps set the priorities in these 3 areas and have been translated into concrete actions which have been included in the Horizon Europe work program with specific topics bundled in what we call a Mediterranean initiative, which has mobilized around 350 million euros for 45 specific topics, for example, on climate change, on sustainable agricultural production and biodiversity in a changing climate. So this is just to say that what is important, and I would like to highlight that when we speak about science diplomacy, shared priorities, common objectives, we have been doing this work in translating all that in concrete opportunities for research cooperation, not only in PRIMA, but also broader in the Horizon Europe work program.
So we have another question there.
Hello, my name is Ilya Uchkov, coming from the Brussels office, Skopje in Istanbul. I'm managing director of ACRIT Network, which is associate and candidate countries, around covering 130 million market, many universities, institutes, research centers. And I have one question for all. At the moment, there are estimations around 9 million researchers in the world, around 7 million politicians, and around 1.9 million diplomats. So I haven't read or heard today how and in which direction science diplomacy would train, educate, or improve the communication, especially with politicians, as we know that in many countries, on local, regional level, politicians are put to the functions by the parties, which very, very low skills, education, and knowledge. So how they will communicate with scientists, for example, and how we're going to support scientists to be more voiceable in part of. Thank you.
Yes, please. Maybe everybody can say something about it.
Just, you know, by training, I am a physician. And as a physician, you are supposed, I mean, it's impossible, a physician not being able to communicate with the family of the patient. I mean, this is something that is as important as being a good physician, being able to communicate with the patient and with the family. A little bit of the same has to be with the scientists. Scientists need to be able to explain what they are doing to the society. That is, in simple terms, to the society. And what is more, outcomes of research, there are only 3 outcomes of research. Services, products, or policy. This is it. I mean, there are not 20 others. When it is services and products, you may try to reach the market. But when it comes to policy, you need to tell policymakers in a language that they understand. I mean, if a policymaker, you tell him or her that the P is minus 0.001, he couldn't care less about this. I mean, he needs to understand whether I will do this or do that. And this is something that scientists need to understand, how to explain the outcomes of their research to those who are taking decisions. There is a lot to do. This is not easy, but I think is absolutely necessary.
Well, I don't want to interfere too much with Christina, who used to work for the Secretariat General of the Commission, but in the Commission we are used to this particular question. And I give you the example when Ursula von der Leyen took office, she was informed about the existence of the JSE, which I still call one of the most known secrets in the Commission. The JSE is made of 3,000 scientists, and she said, "What? Scientists?" And then she showed that she actually put good use to them, which was a shock for many of our scientists, because the people behind the core of the Commission, they are not interested in data. I cannot go to the Secretariat General and talk about data. They are not interested in data. They're not even interested about information. What they want to have is tangible knowledge so that they can take decision, because their job is to take responsibility for the action. So if you got this chain, data, information, knowledge, decision support, right, then the chain science to policy works. And I must say the current Commission was really, really good in understanding this science policy interface. So there is light there. It's not only darkness out there, but we also realize we need much more, because we have this difficulty as scientists in expressing, well, in a complex word, world, in a world full of uncertainties, something tangible and concrete. But maybe, Christina, you can elaborate more, because you have definitely the background.
Thank you so much. I think that in the interest of time and many questions, I will not repeat what the two of you have very eloquently said. What I would like to highlight, though, is that if we are developing an European science diplomacy agenda, is because there are some issues that we need to tackle. If everything was working, we would not be here, which would have been a shame. We would not have developed all these endeavors for this work. So indeed, the rationale on the importance of politicians to listen to scientists was elaborated. The experience also that we have in the European Commission. But if you see the pillars of what we want to do in terms of a European science diplomacy agenda, is also really to have mechanisms which could be put in place at European level by all member states, with the EU facilitated them, to facilitate dialogue between politicians and scientists, and having politicians feeling the need and the importance, for the reasons that have been explained, to listen more to scientific advice.
And may I ask Slim, are you optimistic about the connection between the scientists going all the way to the politician? You've been on both sides.
We have to be optimistic always, but maybe we have to change our methodology of working. The manifesto that we propose, we try to answer at your problematics, because we have some innovation in these documents. In the first edition, we carried by policymakers this document, and supported by an international network of academics. Donc, in the beginning, it was a real collaboration between ministers and academics. Second, it targets a well-identified global geopolitics worldwide, not a specific region. And the third characteristic of this manifesto is it's focused on the contribution of educational and university system to understanding the complex problem of our society. I think that the problem of developing science in South is an individual problem. And the problem of developing science in North is a collective problem. That's why we talk a lot about brain drain in the South. And I think that the science diplomacy can be the best process or framework to balance this relationship. When, in our case, when we have 42 governments signing the same documents with the same priorities, it can be a good framework to work on it and to popularize the dialogue between political makers and academics. That's why we propose this kind of framework.
Okay, we have one more question, then I have some questions here.
Thank you very much. My name is Rasmus Bertelsen from the Arctic University of Norway. I have a quick question on multilingualism, following up on Slim Kalbou's. I had the pleasure just 3 weeks ago contributing to a Francophone science diplomacy training program in Paris, supported by AUF Western Europe and your fellow Tunisian, Olfa Seribi. So if we take the French, the Spanish, and the Portuguese-speaking world, that's probably 1 billion people. 1 billion people Europe can communicate directly with. Why does Europe not much more aggressively use its multilingual advantage? Thank you.
Very good question. I would like to ask exactly this question. I don't know exactly, but I think we have to complete our advocacy for this approach, multilingual approach. I asked the same question when I arrive at IUF, why the European countries don't use more multilinguals especially in science and research. We are doing now studies about publication. More than 90% of the publication are in one languages. This is a very problem for development. So we are working on that. And my presence here, it's one of our steps to maybe change a little bit this facts.
Thank you. I will read two of the questions that are here. The number keeps changing, but one of them is, it's provocative. Is it possible to establish real cooperation with the Mediterranean region at the level of science diplomacy without a clear strategic political vision? That's one. I don't know if that is correct, that there is no clear strategic political vision. And the other one is why science diplomacy is not a valid narrative for the media, though it can prove that media-reported unfriendly countries do mostly, for sure, cooperate in knowledge and research and development. It can prove that media-reported unfriendly countries do most, for sure, to cooperate in knowledge. So.
Thank you very much. I would like to give some elements on the first question, because I think it's really important from a policy point of view. I think that if there is not a clearly strategic developed political vision for the Mediterranean, that's I think what is hinted into in this question, it's really there that science diplomacy is even more important. I mean, science diplomacy can really help to build this policy agenda amongst the different states of the Mediterranean region, and that's what we should support. In my experience as Director for International Cooperation, I've seen so many times how much we can do through international cooperation in research, innovation, and science diplomacy that could not have done in terms of overreaching political priorities. So the reply for me is yes, it is possible and it is necessary.
Can I maybe inverse the question? I want to say, because there is not always a strategic political vision in some region of the South, that the science diplomacy is very important and urgent to do it. So I totally agree with
Any comments on these?
Christina.
I would take the second question. I happen to work a long time in the implementation strategy of the Water Framework Directive, and these were among the most boring meetings you can imagine. And every time I was sitting there, I was aching and moaning, oh, I have to sit in this meeting, these stupid discussions about some limit values of a pollutant in water, and what the heck. And my former boss told me, well, have you ever thought about if we would not do that, what would happen? And actually he brought me to understanding that if we would not have these scientific-driven talks, we would fight, first by words, then by actions, and later by weapons. So science diplomacy is not a valid narrative for the media, because true diplomacy you don't do in the media. You do it outside. Science diplomacy works on an individual basis, about individuals. It's a seed of peace you plant, and you let it grow. So the media, yes, of course, they want to have the big success story of what has been the main achievement. Have you not won yet the Nobel Prize for Peace? Science diplomacy will never win that. But it is because of science diplomacy that we have a Nobel Prize for Peace.
Thank you. So I think we've come to the end of our time, and you have all been very patiently sitting here and also quite engaged with your questions. And I have to say to our panelists, especially special thanks to Christina, because she must be rather tired. So thank you all very much for contributing and making it all very interesting. Thank you.
So thank you very much. This is the end of this first day of conference. We hope you have enjoyed. And we invite you all here in presence and remotely to join us tomorrow at 9 a.m. here in Fundación Ramón Areces for the second day of roundtables. And now there is a cocktail reception right outside. We invite you to join us and continue there. Thank you.